Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 121. Fulfilling Promises. Seth could already hear the sound of a hammer hitting an anvil even before he entered the Master's shop. The rhythmic ding of metal hitting metal chimed not just from Master Tord's shop. It was heard all around like the blacksmith's choir. "Master Tord!" Seth called him after stepping into the store. The sound of the hammer from inside the smithy went silent. The dwarf that stepped into the room was a lot different from the Tord he knew. He wore a clean set of clothes and an unsullied leather apron. His beard was properly braided with golden ornaments weaved into it. A new leather cap covered his baldness and there was a fresh glint in the dwarf's eyes. "Oh, Seth. There you are. Good timing. I already prepared everything for the ceremony." "See ceremony?" Seth asked confused. What ceremony was the dwarf talking about? The one to accept you as my disciple, of course." Tord lifted one of his bushy eyebrows. "Could it be that you didn't properly do your research before asking me to be your tutor?" the blacksmith asked with an impish grin. He had warmed up a lot, after watching Seth managing his shop for 2 weeks and saw great potential in him. I tried. Nobody told me there was a ceremony, though." Seth defended himself. Probably because it's common knowledge. Maybe I should first explain everything to you from the start." "Okay then, come here and sit down." He signaled Seth to come behind the counter. They entered Tord's little office, where they sat down to talk. Where to start? Normally this is done between a master and his disciple when a new blacksmith chooses his class. It is an oath done before the system, that the master will teach as best as he can and the disciple will learn as best as he can. Of course, being a tutor is a little different from being a master. A disciple would be able to inherit the class of the master and learn their special skills, as most masters like me have long chosen a higher specialization. As your tutor, I want to be able to teach you the skills of my specialization. I can only help you train the existing ones we share. Although you want to become my direct disciple, the ceremony stays the same, only the oath is different. It's necessary to make a contract with the system." Seth had kept nodding. He knew about the perks and the difference between tutor and master, but nobody had told him about the ceremony. It's just a simple thing. "Here." Tord gave him a small note with text. "This is the oath. We stand on opposite sides of my anvil, speak the oath and shake hands. That's all there is to it." Written on the oath was only a simple sentence. It was not hard to recite. Once the old dwarf was assured that Seth understood what he had to do, they took their positions and spoke. "I, Tord Tungsten, hereby acknowledge Seth Smith as my student. I will tutor him to the best of my abilities and swear to only support his growth and never betray his trust. I, Seth Smith, hereby acknowledge Tord Tungsten as my master. I will learn and grow to the best of my abilities and swear to never betray his trust." Tord nodded. They shook hand above the big anvil and it suddenly started shining as if to confirm their oath. "Good. Now tell me all about your class." Seth was shocked at first, by Tord's sudden request, but he soon understood when Tord belatedly explained. To really help their student, a tutor needed to know them. Tord needed to know his skills and masteries, so he could make a training plan for Seth. Especially the last part of the oath was meant to make it possible to have no secrets between master and disciple. Tord was unable to talk about Seth's secrets and Seth was unable to disclose the dwarf's. Seth was convinced and they talked a long time about Seth's class, his skill and what he found out, and questions he often had. Truly incredible. A new kind of enchantment that delves into the realm of mysticism. "Well, there are a few things I can help you with right off the bat. I don't know a lot about souls, but I can affirm your suspicion. A big chunk of the experience adventurers gain comes from the soul of their defeated opponent. So, your hammer absorbing the whole soul should be the reason for the missing experience." Seth pondered. Souls made up a big part of the experience gain. Was this also why he didn't get as much experience for that creature in Ivice? Because the soul fire burned away its soul and killed it that way? Anyways, if it was like this, he could not use Karen's obel during party hunts. The hammer would keep feasting on souls until it was full. He could not simply steal half the experience to grow his weapon. He also needed to feed it materials for it to grow. "Oh, now that I think about it. Can I have a week off, before we start my training?" Seth suddenly asked and interrupted the master. Thinking of the party reminded him that he still had some promises to keep. It was not just the equipment for the party, but also the armors for the Lord of Shike. Cerberus was finally done with the scales, so he just needed to assemble 2 armors now. He explained it to Tord, who started to laugh. Why take a week off? Just make them here and let me watch you. It will be a chance to watch how you regularly work. We can continue this talk then while you work, he said with a smile. By the way, Master. Yes. You seemed awfully happy and proper today? Is the oath really that big of a thing? What? Oh. PFF, no. I am not dressed like this because of you. Didn't you hear the choir of hammers? The Blacksmith's district is getting a big assignment and there will be an official event later. Seth blushed, having thought the dwarf was happy enough about his new disciple to even dress up. And what is the reason? He tried to play down his embarrassment. Oh, you should actually know about it. Remember that thing with the fiasco with the curse? It's still not completely under control, but the reason for the big order is that the masterminds have revealed themselves. What? Yeah, the news came recently. A bunch of demons, demon worshippers, and all kinds of dark figures have taken control of a duchy in the north and keep expanding their influence using stuff like this curse. They had the gall to declare war on the dwarven kingdoms. We got a big assignment for the military. He, those shadow goblins will cry for their mommies when they face an army fully clad in divine and blessed armor. The old dwarf said with a diabolical grin, moving his hands as if it was him, crushing their skulls with his own hands. Anyways, the dwarf came back from his fantasy. You can work and stay here from now on. No need to keep going back and forth. They didn't talk for much longer. Seth soon excused himself, since he still had to talk to Finn and Marn about his plans for the future. It was actually not as hard as he thought. When he told Marn that he could run the shop on his own while he was gone, the half-elf smiled so hard from one ear to the other, that Seth was afraid the upper half of his head would fall off. Finn understood him and was more than ready to join Mina's party for the time being. Of course, Seth didn't want his friends to worry or feel bad, but he actually felt a little lost when his friends let go of him so readily. At least he had Puffles, round, silent Puffles, the mighty cocoon. Stop hugging the great me and put me back into the pet space. Chapter 122. Keeping Promises, 2. Starting from this week began Seth time under the tutelage of Master Tord. Under the Master's watchful eyes, he summoned the spirit smithy and started working on the equipment for Yule Cat's fur and the armors for the Lord of Shike. The armors for the latter were nothing too special. He used the snake leather that had been clogging up his inventors as a basis. The scales made from high-quality steel were stitched to the leather in a way that the next row overlapped and covered stitches of the row below. Normally one would use rivets for this, but Seth decided to use some of the ancient bronze thread Nadal had given back to him. At first, Tord only watched Seth fumble with the needle, but soon the dwarf would start giving him advice and taught him about the basics of sewing. Following the 30 scale armors, Seth continued using the needle. He was in the zone and Tord's advice kept helping him making improvements. With Tord's help, he made patterns of Mina's measurements to make a tight leather suit, fitting an assassin and Mina's usual taste. He decided to use a big part of the juvenile's leather to make the complete attire together with a cloak. When he finished the last stitches, he heard an announcement. Ding! Skill, sewing, beginner, leave 1 has been learned. He had finally gotten the sewing skill after such a long time. He started with the item for Bulko and the effect was immediate as his stitches became a lot more confident and regular. It would have been great to have gotten the skill before he made Mina's. It still came out as uncommon, but the durability and defense could have been increased. Well, he would simply give Mina a mithril stiletto, that should make her more than happy. Another big part of the juvenile's leather became a steel-reinforced leather robe for Bulko, and for Mike he made a similar armor from snake bones as the one he used until now. He also planned to incorporate some of the wyvern scales at the vital parts. Is this the effect of your hammer? The old dwarf asked, interested when he saw Seth forge the snake ribs. Yes. It's very handy. Using the hammer as a medium, I can use mana to make organic materials malleable and forge them like metal. Seth explained proudly. Tord pondered and nodded as if he understood something. You asked me about the energy circulation skill, right? Have you tried it ever since the attempt you mention? No? I am fairly sure that your hammer is the reason you were unable to correctly learn it. What? Seth exclaimed. Energy circulation is a special skill most blacksmiths only learn on the higher stages. Your hammer already fulfills one of the biggest uses of energy circulation, which is manipulating organic materials. But there are a lot of low-quality weapons made from monster materials on the market. Seth interrupted him. It couldn't be that high-level blacksmiths would make anything below uncommon. Tord sighed. It's because there is an exception. It's a pitfall many young blacksmiths fall. The class Beast Forger is an uncommon specialization of blacksmith one can choose right after reaching the apprentice. Now, back to he tried to rush the explanation and get back to the topic. A pitfall. Tord sighed again, heavier. But he decided to explain. It's a shame. The class itself is okay, don't get me wrong. It gives an array of passive improvements, harvesting skills similar to a hunter's and energy circulation. A high-level beast forger can make great weapons with strong effects from monster materials. Unfortunately, it's simply a bad choice for a young blacksmith. The class needs a huge amount of mana to forge bast materials, as they become unable to use metals for their works. They will need a great investment to purchase monster materials from adventurers. I think you get the gist of it. They suffer crippling poverty and painfully slow growth until they can either change their class or manage to grow into a successful beast forger. Despite our efforts to warn them, there are many young blacksmiths every year blinded by the chance of a quick advancement. Are you happy now? Can I explain the skill now? He ended a little grumpily. I am sorry. Please explain, Master. Seth appeased the old dwarf. Tord explained that the skill helped to circulate mana during the work on the forge. The mana would follow your breathing and flow through your hammer into the workpiece. This can be used to forge organic materials, but when Seth used Karen's obel the hammer got into the way of the skill. If Seth already knew how to use the skill, it would not have happened, but since he had always used Karen's obel, he had no chance to get familiar with the skill. Following the dwarf's instruction, Seth stopped using the obel and used a normal hammer to train the skill. He worked from dusk till dawn, while he couldn't see the sun in this subterranean city. He worked every day until exhaustion under the watchful eyes and guidance of the dwarven master. The effects were obvious. Even though nothing he made was very special or had a high rating, he got 1.5 to 2 times the proficiency gain and random spurts of experience when he learned something from Tord. Though it did not make a big difference for his blacksmith, the sewing skill grew to level 4, just from making Bulko's robe and the leather parts on Mike's armor. Energy circulation reached level 3 and Seth managed to understand the skill. It felt a little like the breathing techniques in novels he had read about. The mana followed specific pathways in his body, and following the skill he had to time the flow of mana with his breathing and his movements. If he succeeded, mana would flow through the hammer and into the material he hit. It improved the quality of the material slightly and had a similar effect to the option of Karen's obel. Just a little slower. After he reached the 3rd level, Seth was able to use the obel in conjunction with the skill. This not only improved the hammer's effectiveness, but also the resulting enhancements from using energy circulation, such as increased durability and conductivity. The usability of energy circulation did not end there. Tord told him to take a break and follow. They went down into the basement where he showed Seth the training area. The dwarven master showed him that this skill was also used in combat. He took an axe from one of the racks to the side and demonstrated to Seth how it was used. It was very simple in theory. The skill helped to release mana in bursts, only when striking or defending, instead of constantly channeling mana into a weapon or equipment to strengthen it or activate its enchantment. Tord was not only a blacksmith but also a skillful warrior with the axe. Since Seth had the weapon mastery, the dwarf used this chance to add sparring to their regular schedule. On the 7th day, he finally started working on the enchantment for Finn's new robe. Tord's curious eyes looked over his shoulder as he started. It was time for the leveled up soul capture to shine. The new perk enabled him to extract souls from objects. It was not specified, but releasing souls from the item he made was part of it. Seth extracted the orc soul from his padded jacket, which turned back to Natal's golden jacket. The orc soul, on the other hand, had lost the shape he had given it. It was slightly weakened and damaged. Seth infused one of the few medium-sized souls he had managed to scavenge from the drakes to repair and strengthen the uncommon soul. It seemed stronger but was still judged as medium. The increase showed in the soul armor he forged from it. Soul armor. Uncommon. Mag DEF 250. 1 grants 2x the damage against enemies with less STR. 2 plus 340 mana. An uncommon piece of soul armor. Can be infused into a physical armor or worn as is. Since his enchantment was getting close to rank up, the result of engraving the circuit for strength increase was getting close to the best the circuit could do. The enchantment added the option of plus 22 strength. To infuse the armor, he shrunk it to the size of the actual equipment. The training suit for the fairy was a set similar to the pants and shirt Nadal had made for Seth. Instead of making two separate pieces, Seth tried something different. He split and stretched the sole like he did during soul infusion while forging. This had an unexpected result. Brute's robe shirt. Rare. Set item 1/2. Physical DEF 150. Mag DEF 200. Durability 1000. 1 strengthen defense by 50% for 10's mana cost 70. 2 weight of the armor is halved no cost. 3 5% increase in movement speed. 4 plus 150 mana. 5 increase STR plus 12. This extraordinary piece of clothing made to the size of a fairy is part of a set made by the tailor craftsman Nadal. A peculiar enchantment was later added to the equipment. Set effect, 20% increase in defense, 15% increase in movement speed. Skill, Rule of the Strong. Brute's robe pants. Rare. Set item 1/2. Physical DEF 150. Mag DEF 150. Durability 1700. 1 strengthen defense by 50% for 10's mana cost 70. 2 weight of the armor is halved no cost. 3 10% increase in movement speed. 4 plus 150 mana. 5 increase STR plus 12. This extraordinary piece of clothing made to the size of a fairy is part of a set made by the tailor craftsman Nadal. A peculiar enchantment was later added to the equipment. Set effect, 20% increase in defense, 15% increase in movement speed. Skill, Rule of the Strong. The skill granted by the set effect was slightly different from the effect Seth knew about. Rule of the Strong. The weak should fear the strong. Passive, grants 2x damage against enemies with less STR. Active, double your strength for 15 seconds. Cost, 150 mana. Cool down, 15 minutes. He was sure the little fairy brute would love this kind of skill. It had a great synergy with the rest of her skills and her overall fighting style. Technically, this skill could increase her damage by 4 times for a short time. On top of that, the armor would grant her 24 strength and 300 mana. Seth felt a little prick when he thought that this effect would be better with someone who had an abnormal amount of strength, since Finn derived a lot of her damage from her speed. But this was the best, most fitting one he had for her right now. He decided to talk to her if he ever got his hand on something better. It took Seth 8 days to finish everything. His training had not even officially started yet, but he had already learned a lot. Chapter 123. Santa Seth. Seth returned to the inn to look for Mike and Mina. He had not left the halls of stone for a week and was happy to find Finn and the cat girl at the inn's eatery. He had not known how much he had missed her until Mina suddenly caught him in a tight hug, pressing her soft body against him. He had not much time to enjoy it before a sobbing fairy tightly gripped him, braced his face and blocked his sight. Seth. I already thought you wouldn't come out anymore, she whined, rubbing snot and tears on his forehead. It had never felt this uncomfortable to meet Finn. Had she become stronger? F Finn. Let go. You are crushing my skull, he stuttered, and the pressure on his head finally weakened. Everyone calmed down and they sat down at one of the tables. I finished your equipment. Do you know where the rest of the party is? Could you get them? He asked Mina. She nodded and went off to collect the crew, leaving him alone with the fairy. Finn looked a little down. Having finished the items, meant that he was ready to start his training. Hey, it will be all right. It's not like we'll lock me into the workshop. We can meet up, when you guys come back from quests. He gave her a smile. Remember? No goodbyes, only see you laters. With that he took out the tiny martial arts robe from his inventory and put it before Finn on the table. This will remind you of me and make sure you return to me in one piece. The fairy had still been mopey until now, but her eyes suddenly started shining and he threw herself into the golden outfit. When she started floating wearing the golden dragon cube's attire, an overwhelming aura emitted from the tiny figure as she laughed in a sinister manner. She had instinctively used Rule of the Strong and it got her blood boiling. I can feel it. Unlimited power, she screamed and started throwing fists clad in golden energy in the air to test her newfound powers. Seth took cover as the fairy started indiscriminately throwing fists and kicks. She created whines in the eatery that made the cutlery jump and furniture tremble. Finn. Calm down. Belatedly the fairy slowed down after the skill's effect wore off. Whoopsie. Finn is sorry. Finn lost control a little bit. She acted cutely and apologized to Seth and the inn-owner couple. Seth explained to her the effects of the robe until Mina returned with the rest of the party. It was fortunate none of them saw Finn getting overexcited. For Bulko he had the reinforced leather robe. He had gone out of his way and infused a medium-sized soul that strengthened the poison resistance of the snake leather to 25% and gave the priest 100 additional mana. I am sorry I can't do more than this. But I can make staffs or similar caster equipment, yet he apologized to Bulko, as it was not much, compared to what the others would get. The good-hearted giant with ogre blood only nodded understanding. He was more than satisfied with an uncommon rated robe like this. It gave good defense all around and even had additional effects. Mike got the snakebone armor and shield, which was similar to his, but had a better performance thanks to his growth since he had made his own. He also gave him a sword made from high-quality steel with a simple fire enchantment made with mithril inlays. It was his first fire enchantment and the idea was towards. Seth's thoughts had always been more focused on what he could do with his armor to cover his weaknesses. It came as enlightenment, when the old master told him, that enchantments that aligned with one's own affinity would have better results. As such the sword did almost 50 fire damage without any increased cost and was rated uncommon after he finished the enchantment. He gave Mina the tight-fitting leather clothes that fit her athletic figure. For this one, he had the help of Master Tord, as Seth knew no enchantments that fit the job of an assassin. Tord was not a master for nothing. After rummaging through his warehouse, he found a pair of gloves that gave the effect to slightly decrease one's presence. After Seth had learned it, he used several small souls to give every piece of the attire the permanent effect to decrease the wearer's presence by 5%. If she wore everything it would decrease the likelihood of being discovered or noticed by 40%. On top of that, he gave her a stunning stiletto. Lixus was the last one. Seth pulled the robe that looked as if it was made from gold and silk. This is for you. It's made by Nadal, a craftsman-level tailor. Its current rating is rare, but if you can find the right enchanter it might grow to epic. He had not messed with the robe Nadal gave him for her. He was of the opinion that he had done enough by providing the material and the craftsman. He was also not sure how the enchantment of a wizard and soul infusion would mesh together, this was why he left it up to Lixus to find the fitting person for the job. Cladding a whole party in uncommon and rare items seems like much, but Seth felt that he had cut enough corners to make it an appropriate payment for the wyvern materials. Seeing everyone marveling at his present warmed his heart. They kept talking and explaining until later in the day when Seth remembered that he had another thing to do before return to the Dwarven district. He excused himself from his merry company and left the inn. Walking down the darkening streets of Aura he thought about the past and the future. He felt a little sad that he would not be able to spend as much time with Finn, but he was also looking forward to increasing his skills. Once he finished his training, he would return to Earth. Why return to a place where death lurks around every corner? A world in the middle of destruction? Seth came up with many logical answers. Many people advised him to return, not just the church, but Finn, and recently also Tord, when he heard that he was an Orihuma. Allegedly there was much to gain in a world that was going through its transition, such as legendary and even mythical new materials. But he also said there would be other advantages a pacified world like theirs could not offer an Orihuma. He trusted these people, but their words were not the real reason. Was it homesickness? It was itching in his hands. A fire burning in his chest. It was a distinct difference he felt growing ever since he had left Earth. Why was he thinking about this? He stopped this train of thought when he reached the system church. This destination was the reason for his strange thoughts. Once he felt ready, he would come here to return to Earth. But for now, he was only here to send off the 30 armors for the Lord of Hike. Hello, Mr. Smith. Did you come to send something, or would you like to check your mail? Seth was greeted by the clerk. He came here regularly since he still had contact to Serena and the people in Hike thanks to the letter sent via the church. That and he was also the only Orihuma currently in Aura. I have something to send away. I will check my mail since I am already here. Alright. Give us a moment to process your shipment. Let us see, you have one letter. It's from Priest Simon. Simon, the priest from Starta, had written him a letter once in a while after Seth had informed him that he had finally reached Aura. The staff gave him the small letter. Inside was only a short note written. Things look dire. Dante returned to Earth for the time being. Simon. Seth was perplexed by this sudden warning. Since when had the priest cared this much about him? It wasn't like he planned to return to Earth anytime soon, anyway. He shrugged and had soon forgotten the concerning word when he saw the shipping costs. It was the first time Seth sent merchandise through the church, and he understood why merchants rather took the risk of a caravan than teleport stuff around. The teleportation fee for the 3 boxes with armors in them was 15 gold. If Seth was just a retailer, there would be no way for him to make any kind of profit in such a deal. If he thought of the remuneration he got for taking part as an adventurer in a B-rank emergency quest, 15 gold would be enough to pay a B-rank party to protect a whole caravan or several C-rank parties. He paid the money and left, still grumbling about this robbery in open daylight. Well, it had already become evening. Chapter 124. The training begins. Seth sat in Master Tord's workshop. The dwarf stood before him with a blackboard and piece of chalk. Seth looks questioningly at the motivated dwarf. Since your training officially starts today, we will do it right. Since you never had a formal education as an Orihuma, I will start from the basics, he said and wrote down 7 words. As you probably already know, or not, the system knows 7 ratings. Common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, myth, and the outlier unique. You will find these in every aspect of the system. What do you think they rate? Strength? Rarity? Those are only partly true. What they rank are the requirements. My grandfather taught me that before the system descended, materials had specific requirements that a blacksmith had to fulfill to be able to work with them. Take dark steel for example. A metal so thoroughly soaked in darkness, does it make sense that you can simply forge it? During my grandfather's time, a blacksmith who wanted to work with it needed a high resistance against darkness. A high affinity with the earth was needed to work with mithril. Constraints like these were common and limited the number of materials the different races and individuals were able to use. When the system came, they were categorized into the 7 ranks, and now you only have to reach the skill level corresponding to the rank of the material. I am starting with this, since you asked me about the reason as to why you were unable to use mithril, when you were an apprentice. This is the reason. Tord made a short break. But classes and items are also ranked in the 7 ranks, this explanation doesn't make as much sense with those. It doesn't. A class is ranked by the requirement you need to fulfill to attain it. The strength simply coincides with the difficulty of conditions that need to be met. The only exception is unique, as this truly just means one of a kind. Items are usually ranked by the skills a crafter needs to make the item. But take what I say with a grain of salt. The system is no dead and rigid automaton, otherwise there would not be something as ambiguous as the unique ranks. Seth nodded. He had experience with the system being quite flexible at times. From there Tord went off on a tangent about his grandfather, who was given a unique class as an Ori dwarf, and how back then all the dwarven masters had to grind their classes because the system made them start from beginner and leave one. It followed a short history lesson of this continent and the structure of dwarven government. The dwarfs were organized in many small kingdoms with a dwarven high king or emperor at the peak. Seth did not really understand why he needed to know this, until Tord started to explain their work from now on. I am telling you, so you won't embarrass me later. We, the dwarfs of Aura, are officially tasked with supplying the Imperial Army with equipment. This means you will also take part in this order. Let us get to work. Wait. That's it. I thought you would give me basic education or whatever. I think this is enough. I will teach you about the rest while doing it. It's a lot better to spend time working and learning instead of wasting it with talk, the dwarf said dismissively. This was how Seth's work under Master Tord started. And as the dwarf said, he explained as they went along with it. The first thing he did was to show him several ingots of a material Seth had not seen before. This is the metal that will make any demon worshipper pee his pants and make vampires cry for their maker. Blessed Purim, crafting material, rare. This metal is the crystallization of the blood of a holy being. It has a natural affinity with light element and the holy attribute, and an inherent repulsion against the dark element, curses, and the undead. It has been blessed by several high-level priests to strengthen these properties further. The enemy in the north were the people responsible for that horrible curse and the allies of demons. Items made from this metal would be a devastating advantage. Unfortunately, we only have these few bars. What? Even the Dwarven Empire that spread far and wide through the underground of the central mountain range, only knew a few mines where Purim could be found. As expected from a material that crystallized from the shed blood of a holy being. To further save time, the Purim ore received was split among the craftsmen and masters to increase manufacturing speed. Is it really okay, to only use rare material to arm an army on such an important? He bit his tongue as he got a slap to the back of his head. Did you just turn off your brain or something? I thought I just told you, that the rating is not always a solid indicator for strength. What do you think would be better in this situation than the blood of a holy being? Do you want us to get the blood of God to deal with a bunch of necromancers? Not to forget, arm a whole army with it. I am sorry. Yes, you should be. Disrespecting such a precious metal like that. The dwarf rebuked him seriously. Then he explained to Seth the plan. The craftsmen were tasked with making the armors, the masters were going to make the weapons. They would make spear tips from mana steel, a metal refined from blue iron with a high affinity to any magic and able to retain different traits. These spear tips could be blessed by a priest and would be able to retain this power for longer than most other metals, while channeling a user's magic at the same time. So, all skills or magic used with these weapons would also retain a slight holy attribute. In addition, similar to how Seth used mithril as inlays for Mike's sword, they would use the purim to make inlays at the tip of the spear's blade. Just getting in touch with this metal would work on undead and demons like the sun on a vampire. Or so Tord told Seth. You will take care of the inlays. Here, take this, the dwarf said and handed him a small scroll of paper. Seth instantly knew what it was, an enchantment scroll. The first time he had heard about this, Seth had thought these were random scrolls that would put a random enchantment on a weapon. Things like this existed as dungeon loot. But in reality, these were scrolls created by enchantment masters and were similar to skill books or scrolls and instantly taught the user a specific enchantment, if they possessed the corresponding skill. Seth had seen a few of them, but he never used one. Their price was astronomical. It was cheaper to simply buy a weapon and sacrifice it to the skill, to learn the enchantment. A master like Tord giving it to a disciple was the only way to get them for cheap. These scrolls took an ungodly amount of mana and time to create, hence their price. Banishment, enchantment. Deals damage to a demon's connection with the material world. What exactly does it mean to deal damage to a demon's connection? Seth asked the dwarven, confused. Oh, yeah, another basic thing to learn. He scratched his head, trying to come up with a way to explain. He pulled out the chalk and the blackboard. Demons are a little special. They are independent of the path work, just like dungeons and angels and many gods. A demon normally enters a foreign world by being summoned there, and they would make a contract with the summoner to stay connected, like an anchor. Banishment directly deals with damage to this connection. When the chain that connects the demon to the anchor breaks, the demon is literally banished from this world. Accompanying this explanation was a set of cute chalk drawings. The old dwarf was really good at drawing chibbis with chalk. And like this we have all our enemies covered. The weapons will deal damage to the undead, to demons and anything with the dark or unholy attribute, he said with a big smile and signaled him to start working. First Seth needed to turn the purim ingots into wire. In the meantime, Tord was already cranking out the spear tips made from mana steel. The first step of making these inlays was to cut a channel into the base material. For this Seth used an engraving tool from the large variety in Tord's shop. This one was made of mithril. The banishment circuit was made up of mostly line work and still judged as a simple enchantment by the system. Technically Seth was able to make them as a beginner. Technically that was. It was a lot more complicated than the enchantments he had tried before, and he had little experience with making inlays. His first few tries failed when he made mistakes while cutting the channels for the wire. Tord actually had to resmelt those tips. But the dwarf did not blame him but encouraged him to keep trying. It took Seth a week before he stopped wasting the master's spear tips. He still made mistakes, such as cutting the channel too deep, or too shallow. But these could be fixed and did not lead to failure. It helped a lot that Tord was there to show him his mistakes before he finished and failed the enchantment. After cutting the channel came undercutting the sides of the channel. Another chance to make a lot of mistakes, but again. Seth really felt the difference of having a tutor look over your shoulder. If he had been alone, he would have failed dozens of these before getting it right. Lastly came setting the purim wire into the prepared channels by hammering it in and filing the surface flush. The only silver lining despite all the failures was that the experience he got for finishing these enchantments was a lot higher than before. And in this 1 week of failures, he had already closed in on the rank up in enchantment. If you took into account that the needed proficiency kept almost doubling on level up, he had earned as much proficiency in a week as he had in all of the 4 months before when he tried on his own. Chapter 125. Training. Although he had never blamed Seth for ruining his perfectly fine spear tips, The old dwarf's smile became a lot more genuine when he saw Seth's quick growth, which meant he could stop scrapping down perfectly fine spear tips. During the second week, it finally happened. Ding! Skill, Enchantment, Apprentice, Leave 9 has become Enchantment, Apprentice, Leave 10. Ding! Skill, Enchantment, Apprentice, Leave 10 has become Enchantment, Adept, Leave 1. He had finally ranked up in enchantment, which enabled him to use more complex enchantments. The enchantment looked a bit more abstract than the simple circuit. Where the simpler circuits resembled geometric patterns, the complex circuits were more organic, reminding of a winding maze or knots. Not only did the more complex version of the simple enchantments have a greater effect, but there were also new and more abstract effects than before. While the simple circuits had more direct effects like strengthening the user or the damage, the new ones provided crowd control like fear, silence, or direct paralysis. The complex ones also started with effects to manipulate mana. Storing it, amplifying it, stealing it from the opponent. Seth needed at least complex enchantments like these to make things like staffs for caster classes. Seth celebrated this milestone for a short while and then got back to work. Their task was far from over and Seth's training still had a long way to go. The following 2 weeks he worked with Tord on making the weapon for the Imperial Army. Once in a while, he would take a break to visit his friends. Marn was doing great managing the shop. Seth had left him with most of the high-quality steel he had left and Marn managed to reach the adept level recently. With the store's reputation at an all-time high thanks to Seth's work and reputation, Marn was able to shine out from the other blacksmiths and was close to getting an recommendation himself. He kept talking that he might soon join Seth in the Halls of Stone. Seth timed his breaks so he could meet Finn and the party when he left the smithy. At those times they would often go and eat together in that restaurant, on Seth's account of course. With the fairy's strength and the new equipment, they were doing very well in their quests as they traveled around the country. Finn joyfully recounted their adventures and the new sights they came across. She animatedly recounted the fight in her martial arts robe. She refused to take off. He didn't get to spend a lot of time with Mina, but the time they had together they spent well. If you know what I mean. Like this, the time went by. Soon, Seth and Tord finished their task and the completed spears were fetched by the logistics department of the military. Following that, the blacksmith's district became a lot quieter as everyone went back to their daily work. Except for Tord's smithy. Since the important task was over, the old dwarf started to concentrate on teaching Seth. As his goldsmith and enchantment were severely lacking behind his blacksmith skill, he started with making Seth a jewelry slave. Seth started off with simple blueprints and designs for rings and pendants made from normal gold and silver that incorporated simple enchantments. Following those, the old blacksmith kept giving him different tasks and designs that used gemstones as an energy source and storage. Soon the resulting jewelry went from failures to common and sometimes uncommon items. Tord was happy that Seth used his own materials, the gold, silver, and gems he had scavenged on Earth, for these, and Seth was happy because it meant that he could keep them and sell them later. They were no items an adventurer would buy, but a merchant or wealthy commoner would not reject them. It was hard and finicky work for Seth as he was used to swinging his big hammer, but it very rewarding. The designs and enchantments Tord kept making him do, together with the dwarf's advice, maximized the proficiency he gained. Goldsmith, which had been stagnant on beginner leave 4, because Seth just didn't do a lot of accessories, easily ranked up to goldsmith, apprentice, leave 1 within a little more than a week. Now that both enchantment and goldsmith were on roughly the same level, the difficulty dramatically increased. The tasks and blueprints Master Tord gave the young blacksmith were always barely in range of his capabilities, which meant that he often failed, despite the master's advice. Miraculously, this approach worked a lot better than grinding things he could do over and over. Increasing the difficulty was the incorporation of uncommon materials starting with the apprentice rank. It was not as simple as using a completely different material, but the dwarven master taught him how to make alloys with specific properties using gold, silver, and uncommon metals like dwarven copper. Alloys were seldomly part of his material catalog, so he had to memorize the mixing ratios on his own. Tord told him that there was a whole skill around the creation of alloys, but it was hard to acquire it in a short time, as it needed a lot of research to obtain it without the fitting class. It was a lot of work to memorize the ratios, mix the alloys correctly without the system's help, and then make an accessory from it that was barely within Seth's capabilities. But the work was worth it. The better the alloy fit the item and the enchantment, the better was the outcome and the proficiency he gained. It was like knowing all the cheats and shortcuts in a game. Reading a guide to beat a boss, instead of coming up with the strategy yourself. He just needed to follow his guide Tord. The only diversion during this time was the sparring with Master Tord in the underground training room. The energy circulation had, for the time being, little use during his training in goldsmithing and enchantment. It was thanks to the fights with the old dwarf that he was able to not only gain experience in actual fighting but also raise his level of energy circulation. After a few weeks, he had stopped counting at some point. He had used up all the regular silver and gold and the gems. The result was, that he had reached the adept rank in both goldsmith and enchantment. The first was similar to blacksmith in that it only unlocked more materials, the further the skill grew. The latter on the other hand now gave him the ability to combine simple and complex circuits. Like this, he could either strengthen one kind of enchantment or give the workpiece two different effects. Seth's joy was short-lived. He had just gotten used to working with complex circuits and now Tord was already waiting with several sheets of tasks to push him further. The young man could hold on anymore and fell on his knees before the dwarf. "Please, let me have a break. Just a short one. You didn't let me leave the building for the last 3 weeks," he begged, close to tears. Tord sighed. "Oakman. It was not that bad, stop being such a wuss. But okay, go ahead and take your break." Before Tord had completely ended his sentence, his young student had already vanished like a ninja. The dwarf did not even hear the doors open and close. Seth had just left the golden gates of the halls of stones behind him when he felt a change in his pet space. "The great me has returned. Are you happy?" It was Puffles who suddenly announced his presence. What weird timing this was. The Evisor had not responded even once, ever since he pupated. "Did you lie low until I got a break?" Seth asked suspiciously. "And no. How could you think something like this? Even if the great me did finish 2 weeks ago and enjoyed the break, I would never tell you." "So, you already finished 2 weeks ago?" "No. Believe me, I would never lie to you." Seth didn't believe one word, but it was not like he could change anything about it. He could not change the past, but he could change the future. He would simply have the rascal work even hard in making a thread. Puffles was glad when Seth stopped asking, but he had an ominous feeling and was unable not pin the reason for it. "Whatever. What are the changes?" They found a place to sit down at one of the squares in Aura and Seth summoned his pet to examine its growth. The Evisor had entered a growth phase for several weeks and the changes became obvious once he summoned the caterpillar. The Evisor now looked a lot less like the cute caterpillar Seth had gotten used to, and had become more similar to the grown-up Evisors he had seen. The cute chubby caterpillar body had grown to a size that could almost be used as a mount and was now covered by an exoskeleton made of white almost ceramic material. Puffles' portion he held upright reached the height of a human adult and the stubby caterpillar feet had become more defined and spike-like. But they were not yet the terrifying knife-like legs of an adult Evisor. The round golden head had now the beginnings of a neck frill growing. The biggest change was probably the growth of a pair of front limbs that ended in terrifying sickle blades. These were not the only changes, while the initial magic power of the caterpillar form and grown even further and Puffles could now take on the role of a priest, his physical attributes had caught up. The Evisor had great endurance and defense, coupled with its holy magic and the sickles. The closest comparison Seth could come up with was calling the Evisor something like a paladin-type pet. As they were sitting there, they got a bunch of people looking at them. People walking around with their pets was not unusual, but insect-type pets of this size were not common and he got a few interested looks from their surroundings. Seth? Puffles. Chapter 126. Reunion. There were Finn, Mina, and the rest of Yulecat's fur. It looked like they had just returned from a quest as they still wore their dirty and slightly damaged armors and travel cloaks. It was Finn and Mina that had called out to him, the rest all looked skeptical at him as if doubting his identity. That was when he gave himself a once-over and did a little self-introspection. They had not met for over a month, which he spent alone with a dwarf in his workshop. His attire looked no better than the party's battle-worn items. His face was covered in an unkempt beard and he still wore the sweaty clothes and leather apron he wore during work. His whole person was dirty, covered in a mix of metal shaving, sweat, and soot from the forge. He had not even the chance to wash up before fleeing from the workshop. No wonder they had a hard time believing it was really him. Obviously, Puffles also had changed a lot. He looked more dangerous and a lot less cute. "What happened to you two?" Mike finally asked. "Well, Tord didn't let me leave the shop for the last few weeks. I really had to beg him for this little break." "Oh yeah, I wanted to visit my shop. Do you guys want to join us? Seth had already forgotten his appearance when remembered one of his break's objectives. He had 4 boxes full of uncommon accessories and jewelry he wanted to display at his shop. How about you come with us to the inn first? We can all wash up and make ourselves presentable before visiting your shop. How does that sound? This time it was Mina that persuaded him to follow them. Seth only realized how much he had really needed that bath when he submerged into the warm bath water and a dark cloud was released from his skin, blackening the water in the wooden tub. He realized again that learning some household and life magic before returning home was no bad idea. They were minor spells that could clean clothes or purify water. After shaving, wearing a fresh set of clothes, and becoming somewhat presentable, he was intercepted by Mina before he could join the others, making a second bath necessary. After a second bath, they finally joined the rest of the party. Everyone in the party knew why they had taken so long, but didn't mention it. Except for Finn, who gave Mina a big thumbs up, causing the two to slightly blush. It didn't end there. As the group left with the shop as their destination, the fairy sat down on his shoulder and started whispering in his ear. You know you should take better care of your affairs. Do you know how hard it was for Mina in the last few weeks without meeting you? Despite blushing herself, she kept talking. You know, Mina told Finn about your activities and you should take some responsibility for what you did to her. She said it became really hard to find someone who could satisfy her. You should have really taken some more time for the two of you. Fugue. Seth was shocked. What happened to the innocent Finn? The fairy that kept acting cute and brightly flew around him? Instead of happily coming with him, she told him to take more time for another girl? Their relationship must have really greatly improved if she was acting like Mina's pimp. I mean, you are doing her, right? You should omit it. Even Mina, who was listening from the side, started blushing. Stop it. Drop it. Bad Finn. Bad fairy. No more of this. Naughty girl. Go wash your mouth with soap, he started scolding her. Instead of feeling bad or berated, Finn only smiled smugly. The dark seed had been planted, her job was done. Their bickering stopped when they came before Seth's shop. It was closed. At once all kinds of scenarios came to Seth's mind. Did something happen to Marn or the shop? Had the elven blacksmith returned and finally done something to Marn? Just at this moment, the door with the closed sign hung on it opened and a dwarf stepped out of the shop. He was of a slightly smaller and delicate stature compared to the kind of warrior dwarfs Seth had met until now, like Yudrid, or Vadon. His bushy beard was cut short and looked very soft. It fit his overall elegant style and the expensive suit he wore. Seth? Mina, a half-elf asked, confused as he followed the dwarf. It was Marn, healthy and in a good mood even. Marn, are you okay? Why is my shop closed? Your shop? The dwarf interrupted before Marn was able to answer. Yes. This is my shop, and Marn is my employee. Do you have a problem with him? The dwarf seemed amused when he saw Seth, immediately sighed with the half-elf and laughed a little. Then you must be Seth Smith. Quite the contrary. I am happy to tell you, that you will have to find a new employee, as the Merchant Association has decided to give this young man a recommendation to enter the Halls of Stone, he said with a bright smile that made Marn blush. My name is Bertram. I am a representative from the Merchant Association, he said and shook the baffled Seth's hand. The Merchant Association was part of the governmental body of Aura. As the name said, they were originally a group made up of the wealthiest merchants of Aura, and they took on the task of managing the city's business and finances. I wanted to tell you about it, but you didn't return lately and I just handed over the recommendation letter, for Marn to enter the Halls of Stone. It was great news, that Marn finally achieved his dream. The only thing holding him back now was Seth's shop. Seth knew this, and it would have been a lie, if he said that he did not feel regret, letting such a handsome clerk and blacksmith just go. On the other hand, this was not only a chance for Marn. The shop was in a bad location to begin with. Taking Seth's skills and his recent growth into account, this was simply not fit as a place to sell his products anymore. He would start producing rare items from now on. He could sell those in the ghetto. And as chance had it, there was a representative of the administration right in front of him. He ignored the stuttering Marn, who still tried to explain, and spoke to Bertram. That's great. I was already thinking of moving shop anyways, and this might be the chance. This was, of course, a bald-faced lie. He had not given the shop any more thought after starting his training. Except for dumping his items here, and raking the money after Marn sold them off, he had shown no more interest in the shop. Since you are taking such a precious employee away from me, Dante, you think you owe me something. How about a little help finding a new location on the surface of the commercial district? Some might think of Seth's approach as presumptuous. The party members behind him were definitely shocked. But Seth knew, although he had not cared much about the shop, he had a good reputation in Aura. There was a boatload of B-rank adventurers that not only remembered him but had kept advertising his shop. Even so, it became a bit quieter around the shop after Seth had left. The fact that it had kept running smoothly until now and even helped Marn get his recommendation, showed that he was not forgotten. Bertram had fallen silent for a moment when he heard Seth's assertion that the dwarf owed him something for fulfilling Marn's wish. The representative looked at the flustered elf. Marn was handsome, more than handsome. Customers of both genders were touched by his looks and gentle nature. Bertram was a merchant, true. Saying that causing such an asset to leave the business accrued debt seemed reasonable. All right, I will help you find a place on the surface. Of course, for a small fee. I only pay a fee if you take care of the paperwork, too. Deal. And like this, before any of the other really understood what was happening, Seth had already abandoned the shop location and made a deal for a new one. So, it's okay that I leave? Marn asked carefully. No. No, it isn't. You will have to help me find a replacement for you. That's the least you should do. It sounded mean, but Marn was relieved that Seth didn't hold a serious grudge. Bertram promised to search for possible locations and left. Seth went ahead and invited Marn and the party for an eating Conti lunch. It was his break and he wanted to enjoy it. Over dinner, they talked about their experiences of the last weeks. Everyone listened attentively to Marn's soft voice as he talked about stories from his work. Lixis blushed wildly every time she looked at Marn ever since the first time they met at the shop. She had never met Marn before, as she did not usually need items from a blacksmith's shop. Even Finn was spellbound by the narrating elf. Only Mina was weirdly immune to his elven charm. She was sitting beside him and concentrated on decimating the food while everyone else wasn't looking. She had a hard time competing with Puffles and Seth. The first didn't understand humanoid beauty standards and the second had long gotten used to Marn. When Seth asked why Mina didn't care, he got a shocking answer. Elves have no stamina. They are total blanks in bed. Why do you think they have so little offspring? Dante believe their long-lived races are less potent. Look at all the mixed bloods, guess which parent is the elf? 90% of the time it's not their father. She gave him a dirty grin as Seth looked at her stupefied. She used this moment of carelessness and stole a piece of steak from his plate. It was the start of a merciless battle. One of the two had to win, regardless of the consequences. By the time the other escaped the spell of Marn's voice, the table was wiped clean. The food was gone before they even got the chance to touch it. The most heart-rending outcome of the battle was Finn's sorrowful expression as she looked at the three greedy pigs. Their betrayal broke her tiny, tiny heart. Were they not companions? Friends? Were they not brethren on this battlefield of food? She could have understood to eat without the others, but to eat without her. The cruelty of her friends hit the small fairy hard and she broke down in tears. The three culprits only watched her with stone faces. Others might fall for her axe, but not them. Their brethren on this battlefield knew exactly that she was the first to lift her fork if it came down to hogging food to herself. TCH. Finn clicked her tongue and stopped acting when she saw that Seth was not going to order another round of food. All this was of course in sense of good friendship. They ordered another round of food and everyone had a good time until they separated later that day. Chapter 127. Surprising encounter. The others had to go and visit the guild, while Marn went to pack the stuff at their old store. Seth did not know whether Tord would let him leave the next day. That was why he wanted to deal with everything today. His destination was the Merchant Association. Maybe Bertram had already looked for locations. No matter how medieval this world looked, many things were surprisingly modern and fast thanks to magic. The Merchant Association had its seat in a big and imposing building close to the border between the nobles and commercial district. When Seth passed the big wooden doors, he stood in an expansive entrance hall with a reception counter. A short talk with the receptionist and Bertram was called to the reception. You are really impatient? Yes, I have already looked into it. We have 4 to 6 locations depending on your preferences. He brought Seth to his office where he showed him the different shops that could be rented at the moment. Seth excluded 3 right off the bat. They were the most expensive ones, located in prime locations, and one even had a sound-insulated smithing room. Why did he exclude those? All of them reached between 300 to 400 gold to lease. He really just needed a place to drop off his training products. He didn't want to spend a third of his money on something like that. If he wanted to open a losing business, he could have tried to sell his stuff in the halls of stone and try to compete with the dwarfs. The other 3 locations had no smithies, which was no problem as he didn't plan to work in the shop. They were a little off of the main streets, but the price dropped rapidly with just that. He excluded another one because of its size. He focused on making jewelry during his training. He didn't need a big warehouse or showroom. From the last 2, he chose one that was located in an alley off the main street at the halfway point between the Adventurers Guild and the city gates. He guessed that he would get the best mix of travelers and adventurers there. What convinced him was that, instead of leasing it for a long period of time, he could simply rent the place for 7 gold a month. This was not cheap, but since he didn't see how much longer he would stay, this was better. He also filled a form to sell the shop on the 2nd layer of the shopping district. Seth had thought that he had leased it, but Marn had later explained that he had actually bought the shop back then. He would no longer use or need it, so he decided to leave selling it to the Merchant Association. The sun was slowly setting, but there was one last responsibility he had to fulfill before being chained down in the workshop again. Find a substitute for Marn. There was no way that he would find a trustworthy clerk with the little time he had left. Instead, he bothered Bertram with it and placed a job offer with the Merchant Association. They would look for candidates and Seth would only have to come by and choose from the applicants. Once everything was decided, he left all the paperwork to Bertram and left. It was evening and the streets had become dark. Seth had not realized it during the day, but aura had changed since the last time he left the workshop. There were more people on the streets and not in a good way. Beggars and refugees in worn-out clothes and shady-looking people were crowding the streets of the nightly city. Seth felt unsettled after he got used to aura's peace. What was happening? He hurried back to the halls of stones and Master Tord's workshop, where he found the dwarf preparing stuff for tomorrow. The streets? Oh, that. Remember that war up north? The Imperial Army really wiped the floor with those malicious bastards the moment they dared to set foot on our territory. Like the cowards they are, they fled and started wreaking havoc in the human territories outside of our space of influence. You saw the kind of curse they use. I heard there were many refugees and people who lost their homes to them. The old dwarf explained this serious matter in a casual and carefree manner. However, I hope you had fun on your little break. Tomorrow the real work starts. I already prepared the materials and tasks for your training from now on. We will also up the difficulty of our spars, to raise that energy circulation. That was all? After what those people had done in Aura and Tora and other dwarven cities, they just shooed them away and started ignoring them. Tord easily read what Seth was thinking from his expression. Listen here. The dwarfs have a memory of stone. We definitely won't forget this grudge, but we won't waste our precious time to hunt people across the continent that lack the balls to face us. He shrugged and left Seth alone in the workshop, while he went to his room to sleep. Alone in the dark, Seth didn't know what to think. Was it really that simple? After such an opener, those demon guys simply ran off as if they had underestimated their opponent? Seth had given this business not much thought until now. He had rather concentrated on his skills than spent time thinking about the people who had caused most of his near-death experiences in the recent time. But now that he noticed the changes, he was not so sure that this was really over. The malicious necromancy-practicing demon worshippers were in a frenzy to kill humans. If this was a novel, it would be clear that they were growing their forces. Yet the dwarves did not move to nip the problem in its bud. He really hoped they had a good countermeasure. If this was simply their confidence, he hoped to leave this place before the shit hit the fan. Seth decided to keep an eye out for news on that situation. Maybe he could get information from the guild or Venturi directly. Writing a note in his mental notebook, he also went to sleep. It cost Seth another week of exhausting training and overworking before he could finally wheedle another break out of Tord. He first visited the shop, but it was empty. Finn and the party had also left town. Since he didn't find any of his friends, he went to the Merchant Association to see if there were any updates. Seth, you came just at the right time. I was just about to contact Master Tired to send you over. The paperwork is done and we have a few applicants for your job offer. It didn't take long to sign the documents to take ownership of the shop and screen the applications. Can you invite these 3? I want to interview them. Sure. Give me a moment, the dwarf said and left. The 3 Seth had chosen were 2 men and 1 woman. From the portraits on their application, they fit the requirements for a clerk. One guy looks tall and quite handsome, the other was rather innocent and soft. The girl looked cute and a little chubby. Their skills were also sufficient, but he wanted to see their personality before he decided. I have sent someone to go and tell them to come here for a job interview. They should arrive here in a few hours. Do you want to wait, or should we go inspect the shop in the meantime? Sure, let us go. By the way, do you know where Marn is? He wasn't at the shop when I visited earlier. Marn? Oh, he stays here at the association until we find the right master for him. Since we recommended him, we offered to lend him a room. Can I meet him? They made a small detour to visit Marn in his room. When they knocked on the door, they heard a panicked scrambling from the inside and a barely clothed half-elf opened the door belatedly. Marn only wore a bathrobe and his face became red as a tomato when he saw Seth and Bertram at his door. It was no just Seth, even Bertram had a knowing smirk on his face. The elf was obviously living life to his fullest. Marn, what's up? Before anyone talked, a slightly more clothed quarter elf looked around the corner and became even redder than Marn a second ago. Lixis, also only wearing a bathrobe, became so red when she saw Seth and Bertram, that they could almost see the steam rising from her head. Wow! Sorry, Marn, I really didn't want to interrupt, whatever you guys were doing, he winked, I just came to ask for the stuff from the shop, since we are on our way to the new one. The wink made it even harder for Lixis in the back to calm down. Marn hurriedly gave Seth some boxes with weapons and jewelry and hurriedly shooed the 2 away. The dwarf and the blacksmith had a good laugh and merrily went on their way to the shop. Chapter 128. New shop. Seth urged Bertram to hurry. This was one of the few cherished breaks and he still wanted to get a good meal, after dealing with business. The dwarf had a hard time keeping up with the blacksmith's speed and under Seth's constant nagging they arrived at the shop in a record time of 10 minutes. Bertram had a hard time catching his breath as he tried to explain the features of the shop. The building was smaller than the shop he had underground, but the showroom was about the same size, with a small room for storage and an office in the back. The shop had anti-theft magic built in, together with a binding feature and a defense system. The items could not only not be moved by unauthorized people but also bound anyone who tried to steal an item. The defense system would protect the shop and products from harm in case a fight broke out or someone tried to break in. Seth kept nodded as he listened to the dwarf introducing the features of his new shop and went to the back. There was a small storage room built like a safe. He put everything from the old shop and the new stuff in there. His new employee could take care of sorting and displaying it. As Bertram was explaining to him how to control the features, they heard the sound of bells. Someone had entered the shop. Who would come to a close shop just after they entered it? There stood 3 people heavily panting with sweat soaking their clothes. Arim, hello. Seth tried communication. He had no idea what was going on until he saw their faces. These 3 were his potential employees, but what were they doing here? Ah, I can explain. I didn't know how long he would take, so I left a message at the guild, to send them after us if they were faster than expected, the dwarf explained. They had been in the shop for maybe 45 minutes. Taking into account the walking distance from the Merchant Association, how fast had Bertram's messenger found them? Seth gave them a waterskin and they waited for them to calm down and catch their breath. After a short introduction came the job interview. Seth had already thought of something and brought out a common ring he showed the 3 of them. It was one of the first he succeeded to make. The workmanship of the ring and enchantment was barely existent at best, and that was the point. What do you think of this ring? He simply asked and gave it to them. The tall and handsome one scratched his head. It might be a nice gift. The smaller innocent looking on the other hand made big surprised eyes. What a beautiful ring! As expected of such a skillful blacksmith as Sir Smith. An idiot and a snake. Next was the cute girl. She was a little chubby and her personality seemed joyful and bubbly. But when she took a closer look at the ring, she looked disappointed. I heard that this was the shop of a well-known blacksmith. Why are you showing us such a crude ring? Are you telling me to sell this? Not even a broke merchant would want this. If this is the kind of merchandise I'm supposed to sell, then I will leave. You are hired. What? Exclaimed Snake, an idiot. I prefer honest people, what can I say? The ring is garbage and fits to be recycled. Anyone with eyes can see that. Of course, this is not the level of stuff we sell here. The girl's face only lit up after Seth showed her one ring he planned to sell. It was still rated common, but it was worked more intricate and the engraved enchantment was well hidden. Only then did she turn back into a happy, bubbly bundle of joy. Her name was not important. Bertram pulled out a magical employee contract that eased Seth's doubt in leaving his stuff with her. It actually worked similar to those slave contracts or collars in fantasy. After signing it, she would not be able to do anything to harm the shop or steal stuff. If she did, the contract would punish her. She still looked quite happy, until he showed her the crates of products and told her to sort and shelve them in the shop while he would go for lunch. Seth would come back later and tell her the prices. Seth had dealt with the business in a satisfactory manner and invited Bertram for a meal. The magical contract was a great idea and brought the dwarf some bonus points with Seth. As they sat in a cafe, the dwarf suggested and waited for their order. Seth had time to watch the crowd. There were even more figures in worn out and damaged clothes. Dirty from a long journey, they would stumble among the regular crowd or sit in a corner, begging for money or food. Their numbers had easily doubled since the last time Seth came out. A shame, isn't it? The human countries in the north keep losing to the demon army. That is, if you call the populace being turned into mindless puppets or undead and killing their own soldiers losing to an army. More and more people flee in fear. Bertram suddenly said. He had followed Seth's gaze and commented on the situation. Why aren't the dwarves helping them? Isn't it bad that those guys keep amassing troops? Bertram could only shrug his shoulder at Seth's question. No idea. I am not high enough to be told the reasons of the royals. I heard that they shared the way to get rid of the curse with the humans, but it did not seem to help. Master Tord had said they easily repelled them, but the human armies had such a hard time, even dispelling the curse? Something didn't seem right in this situation. Seth was seriously debating whether he cared enough to try and investigate the truth when their food finally arrived. Seth didn't hold back, and Bertram, despite his slim looks, was also a big eater. They enjoyed their food and talked about happier topics like items and making money. Everyone knows the best decisions are made with a full stomach and an idle mind. He decided not to care about the big picture. He was not some hero of justice that had the urge to reveal the truth and fight some terrible conspiracy. I am a blacksmith, that's not my job. Leave it to some hero, he thought to himself, and enjoyed the warm feeling and sluggish mind after a good meal. There probably was not even a truth to reveal. Chapter 129. Ding. 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 Headache. After finally reaching adept in all his occupational skills, the growth slowed down. Compared to his experience with Blacksmith, he was still a lot faster thanks to Tord's tutelage and help. The items, design, and enchantments he made Seth do were the most efficient way to level up the skill. Still, even Tord was surprised with Seth's growth at first. Even without his cheatsy soul smithy, he was growing much faster than an ordinary apprentice. It was until the dwarf remembered that Seth was an Orihuma, to begin with, and enjoyed a great growth buff from the start. It was one evening during the sparring with the axe-wielding dwarf. His weapons mastery had been stuck at 99% of Adept Level 9 for quite a while. Tord had told him that this was not too uncommon since weapon mastery was a secondary skill. These often need some kind of inspiration or breakthrough to level up, especially on the higher levels. The trigger was energy circulation. With its level rising, the effects of the skill became more pronounced. The forge was where it really shined because it was a circulation optimized for blacksmithing. It eased the stress of constantly working with high-tier materials, and he was now able to barely forge non-metallic materials. Unfortunately, the efficiency was still even worse than simply using Karen's obel. When used in battle, it would strengthen the weapon with short bursts of mana during crucial moments such as blocking or swinging the weapon. Thess burst could also be used to activate the item's enchantments at that moment. Using the skill optimized for blacksmithing in a battle had taken a lot of time and effort to get used to. A change appeared starting from level 5. When used on the weapon, it would not only strengthen it but also apply something like an energy blade to the weapon. This made the skill once again harder to control. It took Seth several weeks to get used to it, but he came to like this new feature. Tord had stimulated his imagination when he told him that energy circulation was the skill that allowed combat classes to shoot energy attacks from their blades. Seth was motivated to increase the skill's level. Even if he needed a much higher skill level to do the same thing, he would be like those protagonists from martial arts novels. Using sword chi and posing as some immortal sword master really tickled his fancy. He often trained alone until deep into the night to get a feeling for the energy blade. During the aforementioned sparring with Tord, Seth watched Tord launch a transparent energy blade at him using his axe. He dodged it and, after gaining some insight from the dwarf's attack, tried to imitate him. Ding! Skill, Energy Circulation Leave 6 has become Energy Circulation Leave 7. The new insight he gained from the skill gave him a weird idea. The next moment a panicked dwarf jumped out of the way of a quickly approaching wave of pale fire. Ding! Skill, Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 9 has become Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 10. Ding! Skill, Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 10 has become Weapon Mastery, Expert, Leave 1. Ding! Ability, Fire Manipulation Leave 9 has become Fire Manipulation Leave 10. Ding! Passive Skill, Fire Affection Leave 4 has become Fire Affection Leave 5. Ding! Ability, Fire Manipulation Leave 10 has become Pyrokinesis Leave 1. Seth had simply tried to combine the principle of energy manipulation and his ability to control fire. It triggered a terrible headache and flood of messages as skills that were previously stuck leveled and ranked up like a falling row of dominoes. Weapon Mastery had ranked up to the Expert rank, which was a rank exclusive to secondary skills. It bridged over the Journeyman and Craftsman rank a primary skill had. So the next rank of Weapon Mastery would be Master. What the hell was that? The grumpy dwarf shouted. Tord was still patting his beard that was slightly singed by Seth's little experiment. I simply tried to use my fire manipulation similar to how energy manipulation works. Guess it worked better than expected, he said, massaging his temples. But your circulation skill is only Leave 6. How did it get so big? 7, it just leveled up. Probably because it's an ability and not bound to my mana? In exchange, it took a lot of mental energy and gave me a massive headache. So please don't talk so loud. I see. Then you will have to learn how to control that in the future. And like this, another lesson was added to his daily routine that would cause him to go to bed with terrible headaches for a week or two. The functions pyrokinesis were not much different from fire manipulation. Technically those were synonyms. His control over fire became a lot more instinctive and smoother with the rank up. The cost of normal usage also lessened, while the precision increased. The rank up helped a lot in adapting to using it in conjunction with energy manipulation. Seth could only tremble at the thought that he might have taken months to adjust the output during training. This would have been months of sleepless nights, tortured by splitting headaches. With pyrokinesis he got the hang of how much he could use without side effects after 2 weeks. The first night without a headache felt like heaven, and Seth learned just how blessed one was, to be able to get a good night's sleep. Now, he cursed himself for not sleeping more in the past. Wasting his time on games, when sleeping and eating were the true pinnacles of life. But he really enjoyed pulling all-nighters to play a game or read a good story, so he forgave himself. At least the result of this terrible training was worth it, more or less. He could not really fire off impressive energy blades or flame waves without incapacitating himself at the moment. Instead, he could use this method to cover a sword in a very thin and sharp layer of pale blue, almost white flame. This cost Seth a lot less than directly using his ability to cover the weapon, and the visual effect was very cool. Similar to a lightsaber, the weapon would leave a trail of light, heat, and fire. What was to be expected was that this application was a lot more powerful in the smithy. When forging he could use it to control the heat of his workpiece. He could keep the temperature of the material constant for a longer period of time and did not have to return as often to the forge. For common and some uncommon materials, he only needed to heat them up once in the forge, and then he could keep working them on the anvil until he was done. It not only saved time but also helped in training his fire-related skills and the energy circulation. His other skills also came along well, as Seth had already reached Leave 3 in Goldsmith, Adept, and Enchantment, Adept. He kept spending a lot of time and money on the materials he needed for Tord's tasks. Fortunately, he was also able to make back several times the money, with the newly set up shop. Despite the current situation in Aura and the lesser frequented location, business was doing well. Seth's reputation was good, and the fact that he was working under one of the city's 3 masters brought in many visitors through word of mouth. Despite spending money like crazy, it came back in even faster than he could spend it. Of course, while Seth was sweating blood and tears, he made sure not to be alone. Whenever Seth was forging or sparring, Puffles was not far away cranking out celestial bronze. With the speed after his evolution, Seth was sure there would be enough thread for a new gambeson from Naddle. As he got more and more used to fighting and skillfully using the soul fire, he felt the urge to return to the dungeons. He was more than fed up with quests and fighting after what happened with the B rank exam. That was back then. Several weeks of peaceful and exhausting training had recharged his adventure batteries. He needed some change. Seth wanted to see the fruits of his training. Also, he was level 24 with only about 50% to go. There were more system privileges waiting and maybe he would unlock another class skill? He had been thinking about this for a long time now and it was driving him crazy. Tord also would not tell him about the system privileges. To sum it up, the increase in fighting power was the perfect excuse to run away from training and level up to see what level 25 would bring. Chapter 130. Crawling the Dungeon. Seth talked with Tord about his plans to test out his new skills and asked for a break. Sure, I won't stop you. Actually, I am also quite interested in the power of this flame in combat. Show me your equipment. Seth was a little baffled at the sudden command, but he brought out the set of serpent armor and his padded jacket from Naddle. It was then that Seth realized that he was actually quite lacking in the item department now despite being a blacksmith. And a good one if he was allowed to praise himself a little. Tord inspected the different parts of the serpent set with a mixed expression but gave an approving nod when he saw the thin golden gambeson. His eyes even shone a little brighter when he touched the fabric. Good stuff, he grunted. I won't let you leave the house wearing the rest of this. You are now my disciple, I will not let you run around in such a shabby armor. His evaluation of the serpent armor was quite harsh, but Seth could somewhat understand it. His skills in enchantment and goldsmithing had grown a lot and now the enchantments on the bone armor just looked ugly, like a child's doodle. Tord took the serpent armor and vanished in the storeroom with it. Seth heard him rummaging around and soon the dwarf came back with a new set of armor in his hands. I made this as practice when I was about your level. It should fit you. At first glance the armor did not look very fancy. Seth might have been able to make armor like this himself if he spent a week. It was a set of black full plate armor. The main material used was dark steel with mithril inlays for the enchantments. Dark Knight Cuirass. Dark Knight set 1/6. Rare. Physical DEF, 650. Mag DEF, 325. Durability, 2800. 1+25 Endurance. 2+10% mana regeneration in darkness. 3 automatic sizing. An armor made by a talented blacksmith made from rare materials. Even so, it was made for practice, it is in no way lacking. Set effect. Passive skill, menacing stature. A dark knight strikes fear into his opponents. His sight alone is enough to make those of weak hearts flee. 3/6. Plus 20% defense in darkness. 6/6 non-allies are weakened by 10 to 25% depending on your level difference. 50% chance to make weak opponents flee from a fight. 5 to 10% chance to paralyze opponent INF fear. Seth's jaw dropped. The other pieces had a similar effect but strengthened other attributes. Each part for itself was not too impressive, but seeing the full set revealed its overbearing nature. It was no brutish show of savagery, but an aura of nobility. The armor told everyone who looked at it, that he was not good enough. Too weak, too lacking, not worthy to even look at the Dark Knight's overbearing might. It was like the cold arrogance of absolute power. It reminded him a lot of one of the most feared opponents of a game known for its merciless difficulty. I'm supposed to wear this? Seth asked unsurely. Sure, I will lend it to you for your adventure. At the dwarf's urging he put the armor into his inventory and equipped it via the system window. Agility, strength, dexterity, endurance increased by 25 points each, filling him with an overwhelming feeling of power. The helmet had an enchantment that allowed him to have an unimpeded vision, despite the helmet. Tord looked up at him with big round eyes, before shaking his head and coming back to his senses. The set effect did not even halt before its creator. Non-allies meant anyone who was not in the wearer's party. He could not even wear this on his way to the dungeon, he could cause a mass panic. Okay, take it off. Did the automatic sizing work? My enchantment skill was still a little immature back then. Everything okay? It fits like a glove, Seth answered after taking the armor off again. Feeling the buff effect sleeve left him with an empty feeling. 25 points increase in all physical attributes was no joke. He wondered whether there were people that got addicted to this. Oh, and use this when you go to the dungeon, Tord said and pulled out a sword. Training sword. Common. Damage, 200. Durability 1200. A heavy sword made from common steel by Master Tord for the purpose of training. The sword was very thick, slightly dull, and heavy compared to what a sword was supposed to be. It felt more like a steel pipe and less like a sword. First, he gave him this overpowered armor and now an almost unusable sword. The dwarf read Seth's expression and laughed joyfully. You said that you wanted to test the effects of your new skills, didn't you? Using this will make for a much better test and training. There is no way you will die with this armor, as long as you don't overdo it. Now, go and get some experience in real battles. Seth kept thinking about Tord's intentions on his way to the guild. It made sense, that using a worse weapon would help to increase his skills, but why did he only give it to him now? The only reason he could think of was his rank up in weapon mastery. Maybe he simply lacked the skill to reliably use this method before? Or it was needed to guarantee continuous growth. Seth wasn't sure about the reason, but he was certain that Tord had his reasons. This was actually his first time at the dwarven branch of the guild in the Halls of Stone. The building was part of the City of Eternal Night. A big pillar decorated by illuminated carvings of adventures and heroes. The inside was dominated by intricate works of marble in different colors. The biggest difference was that it was filled with dwarven adventurers and only a few other races. The general description for a dwarven adventurer should be armed to the teeth. No matter their class, they were all armored like tanks and armed like damage dealers. You could only mage out dwarven caster by attentively inspecting their weapons. A caster's staff normally had a nucleus, like a crystal embedded at the tip. If one looked closely, one could discover these embedded in warhammers, pole arms, and maces of dwarven casters. Without his blacksmith's eyes, Seth would have seriously thought every dwarf was a frontline fighter and there were no casters classes at all. He came to the guild to get information on dungeons. With the restrictions he had, he decided to look for a dungeon in his level range. He had little to no idea about the dungeons in the Halls of Stone as those were not part of the little tourist booklet he was given. He stood out like a sore thumb as he waited in line for one of the counters. Unlike what one might think, the surrounding dwarfs did not look at him with leery and unfriendly eyes. No, their eyes were actually sparkling as if they saw a successful businessman or star. The reason was simple: to enter the Hall of Stone as a non-dwarf one already needed to be an accomplished person like a good craftsman. Any non-dwarf had to be a respectable person. Especially as an adventurer. B ranks were respected far and wide. They were the most common powerhouses in the guild. AOR even S ranks were hard to meet, even as a guild staff. Seth was a role model who had accomplished their aspiration of becoming a B rank. He finally came to the counter where he found the only kind of dwarf in the whole room, that did not wear heavy armor and weapon. It was a dwarven lady with a shiny blonde beard and hair. She wore the guild staff uniform, which made it a lot easier to discern her gender. "How may I help you?" she asked in a deep and smooth voice. Seth got a list of all dungeons that were part of the dwarven district. Many were old mines and caves that had transformed after they were not used anymore. The scope became a lot smaller when he looked at those in his level range. There were only 3. 2 were the kind of cave dungeon where monsters like orcs, hobgoblins, or trolls appeared. The one that pulled his interest was the last one. It was an old dwarven garrison that originally guarded a now abandoned trade route. The route became less and less profitable and the soldiers were recalled, only leaving a small guard team. At some point, they were overrun by monsters called cave crawlers. The place was not worth recapturing and was instead closed off. Only once it had turned into a dungeon and broke out was a subjugation force sent and the guild started managing the place. The cave crawlers were ant-like insect monsters the size of a wolf. Unlike ants who build a hill, their behavior resembled wolf spiders or tarantulas. They lived in a kind of family or tribe and hunted without nets in the expansive cave and tunnel systems. An old ruin filled with ant spiders sounded a lot more interesting than a cave with goblins. Seth had the utmost trust in the new armor and treated this as more of a sightseeing tour than something dangerous. The level cap of the crawler in the garrison was 30, so there was nothing to be afraid of. Before leaving he asked for a quest at his destination. He could also make some extra money since he was there anyway. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Quest, Alchemist's Order. Difficulty, D. Alchemist Elric needs the poison sacks of cave crawlers and asked the guild to get them. Will you get the sacks for Elric? Requirement, 0/30 poison sacks. Rewards, 150 silver. Do you accept the quest? Chapter 131. Crawlers in the Dungeon. After accepting the quest, Seth left the guild. He used the analog map in the little booklet to find the passage that led to the old trade route. After showing his adventurer card, the guard let him enter the locked-off tunnel. He had to walk for almost 2 hours after leaving the bounds of the city. It was a wide tunnel fit to allow 2 to 3 carriages to travel beside each other. Dust and dirt had accumulated from the years of neglect. There were only a few footprints from other travelers or adventurers that had come this way, too. He had equipped the dark knight armor after leaving the city. This made his journey very quiet, almost peaceful. There were few monsters, to begin with, but those that appeared hurriedly ran away when they saw their prey. After these roughly 2 hours, the ceiling above his head became higher as he stepped onto a square in a big cave. On the opposite side of the square, he could see the entrance to the ruin. The fortification structure was rather simple. It was a double-door system with one gate in the direction of the dwarven city and one gate facing the trade route, a road carved into the side of a big gorge with a deep abyss on one and a steep wall on the other side. The gates that had once blocked the entrances were long destroyed and only the twisted metal fitting told about their existence. Seth could see right across the inner square of the garrison and onto the path in the gorge. Seth equipped the training sword before stepping through the empty archway that once held the gate. The only light in the square fell in from the various arrow slits directed into the gorge on the left and the exit on the opposite side. It created a tranquil twilight. Pitch-black windows, like hollow eyes, filled the wall to the right. There were the facilities of the fort carved deep into the stone. And there was the actual location of the dungeon. Seth was not bothered by the darkness, since he had the necklace that gave him night vision. Seth had a different problem, his height. As he entered his found all the ceiling to just high enough for him to stand upright. He would not be able to make any big overhead swings or diagonal slashes without hitting the ceiling. This was a great strategical advantage for dwarfs who could comfortably fight in this environment, but it was a big disadvantage for Seth. Seth concentrated on his surrounding as he walked through empty hallways. Where were the crawlers? Did the run from the presence of his armor? He was just relaxing a little when he heard scuttling behind him. And turned around just in time to block something that jumped at him with an ear-splitting hiss. Slime-dripping mandibles closed mere centimeters in front of his face as he held the beast back with the sword. The cave crawlers looked nothing less than revolting. 6-legged hairy spider-like ants with disproportionately big behinds. Seth never had a problem with spiders or ants, but this was a really ugly mutant, almost unnatural. Instinctively he shoved the thing back and sent it flying with a kick. He activated his breathing technique and sword intent covered his blade. Of course, this was his wishful thinking, but he felt a lot cooler if he called energy circulation that way. Maybe he could fake being a cultivator when he returned to Earth? Cave Crawler Leave 28. Status effects, menacing stature, 15% decrease in overall stats. HP, 820/1000. Mana, 15/90. It was slightly hurt and had little mana. Had it used a skill to sneak up on him? Seth wanted to test how strong these crawlers were and deactivated energy circulation. What ensued were 5 minutes of painful death for the cave crawler as Seth kept bludgeoning it with a blunt sword and overwhelming attributes. If it had a mind, its last thoughts probably were, if you are this strong, why not just kill me? Why are you so cruel? Ding! You have killed, Cave Crawler Leave 28, you have earned experience. After turning the insect into mush, Seth belated realized that he had destroyed its poison sac. Looking at his experience bar, he gained about 3%. This was his only profit, as the crawler didn't even drop a soul. With this amount of EXP he would need to kill 20 to 30 cave crawlers to level up. He kept going deeper. These ruins were just an appetizer. The crawlers here were not actually dungeon mobs. The dungeon entrance was where the actual dungeon was originally located. He had the directions from the guild, but he simply used auto map to map out the whole ruin and find the entrance to the dungeon. This door was neither withered nor dirty. It looked like a solid, glossy gate. He entered the dungeon and stood in a long messy hallway with dark prison cells to the left and right. The ceiling was a lot higher and vanished in the darkness above the torches that illuminated the hallway below. The cells were open rooms with a wall of iron bars towards the hallway. None of them were really intact with a bent or broken bars and door open and ripped from their hinges. This design seemed quite generic for something he would find in a game, but it was a lot more unsettling in reality. Especially the fact that no light from the torches actually fell into the prison cells. Anything could hide in them, or in the darkness on the ceiling above. This was supposed to be a dungeon full of cave crawlers, right? So, what exactly had broken out from those cells? What did the dwarfs hold in these cells that had the strength to bend and rip iron bars? Seth calmed himself with the theory that this was simply the quirky taste of the dungeon master when it came to interior decoration. He had especially checked with the guild before. There were no anomalies with this dungeon. Just a week ago a different party had visited this dungeon without problems. This just had to be some generic theme for a dungeon. Seth stayed vigilant as he entered the hallway after reassuring himself that everything was okay. He had even left Puffles at the workshop, so the eye-visor could keep making celestial bronze. He had gotten used to having company, so now he felt a little lonely. He was soon able to push these thoughts back. As he started exploring, he finally encountered his prey. Sometimes single exemplars would suddenly jump out from the dark cells on the sides of the hallway or try to fall at him from the ceiling. Most of the time he found in groups of 2 to 4 on the way. Fighting them with just the energy circulation and its sword energy was already a vast improvement to the bludgeoning he did before. It behaved almost like a sharp sword. Still, the nature of the training sword made it hard for Seth to execute the moves how he wanted to. He felt like he was actually fighting 1 or 2 ranks worse than usual. The effect was good considering the new rank. The bar increased by tiny slivers, fractures of a %. In the cases when he missed his objective and left openings for his attackers, it was time for the new armor to shine. And it kept shining, even if it was hit by an attack. The cave crawlers could not even leave a scratch on the rare armor. He felt the impact, but any damage was simply negated by the strong defense. This greatly calmed Seth's mind. He relaxed a little and got in the mindset to experiment and training his skill. Although he felt a lot worse when it came to his handling of the sword, channeling the soul fire into the blade as a kind of sword energy felt overpowered. Imagine comparing a steel blade to a laser blade, that was how Seth felt. When he slashed at the chitin shell of a cave crawler and the pale flame covered the edge of his sword, he could barely even feel an impact. The stench of burning flesh and hair filled the air as the crawler's shell and meat were burned and carbonized. It was like the laser sabers from Star Battles. Imagine the effect if he used a good weapon. But was this because the skill was really powerful, or were these creatures just terribly weak to fire? He had to know. It would be terribly embarrassing if he tried to slash an orc like this and all he got were light burns. Once he found the next group of 3 crawlers on a fork in the road, he decided to test it. He switched from using the weapon and energy circulation as a medium to directly bending fire with pyrokinesis. A big difference to before was that this new skill made it a lot easier to detach the fire from his body and at a lot lower cost. How cool would it be, if he could make a martial art move like the firebenders in a cartoon he knew and fire a giant wave of fire at his enemies? Unfortunately, this was not the scale he was operating on, yet. Seth formed a fist-sized ball of pale fire and shot it at the closest crawler. This was the most he could manage without getting a splitting headache. Despite its laughable size, it simply penetrating the crawler like a marshmallow. Leaving the burning target behind, it collided with the next one and exploded, setting them all aflame. The penetrated crawler was dead and the burning 2 tried to rush at him but broke down from the pain before even reaching him. Seth blinked. What did this mean now? Were they weak to fire, or was the soul fire just too domineering? He realized that this experiment had no other result but crawlers being weak to his fire. No matter what form. After making this conjecture, he stopped using the fire. On one side he wanted to recover his mental strength and on the other, he came to train his fighting skills and energy manipulation. He would not get far if all his enemies melted like butter before a hot knife. Chapter 132. Greatest Dungeon Crawler. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now level 25. Ding. New class skill has been unlocked. Check your skill window. Ding. You have completed the quest the next level 4. You have earned new system rights. Ding. You have received a follow-up quest the next level 5. Seth had just killed the last crawler and stood in front of the gate to the boss room when a flood of notifications sounded. He first took a look at the system rights. His inventory had expanded by another 5 slots and the system window now had 2 new tabs called Sets and Reputation. The first was an option to store and register 3 pre-made item sets and use a quick change to swap between them. For example, Seth could register his casual clothes he wore in the workshop, the travel attire, and this armor. Then he would not have to equip every item separately, but swap his whole attire in one go. It had a small time delay and could not be used in combat, but it was still a huge improvement in quality of life. The second was a list of people and places he had met and visited. He had a good reputation in Aura Or's hike and intimacy with the Lord and his son, for example. But there were a lot of names he had never heard before and he could not think of how he gained that intimacy off the top of his head. The highest value he saw was 830 and the name beside it was Finn Belsmiter. He could have guessed that. Slightly below was Mina with 650 and Marn with 600. The other party members ranged between 500 and 600. There was also one negative value of 200 with the name Liar beside it. He could not, by the love of God, remember who he offended to be hated. Seth made the bold guess that 1000 was the maximum in both directions. He dared to say that his friendship with the party of Very Good and Finn was his best friend. If 0 was neutral and 500 to 600 was probably the value for really trustworthy friends, then was 1000 like. Anyways. He shook his head to stop those thoughts. He got mixed feelings when he looked at his skill window and saw a new skill. It reminded him of his dark history. They had tried for a long time and even with Tord's teaching, Seth's skill in singing forging ballads was horrible. Even after learning those of the dwarfs, which sounded more like a deep chanting, the results were cursed weapons with random effects like Warhammer of Urge. Uncommon. Damage, 130. Durability 530. One targets will feel the sudden urge to pee. A steel warhammer made by an aspiring blacksmith. An unknown entity was amused by the maker's attempt of singing. After trying for a few weeks, Seth had finally given up. Getting this skill now made a mockery of his efforts. Voice of Orpheus Leave 1, passive. Grants you part of the power of Orpheus, the greatest poet who ever lived. A man you could soften even the heart of the ruler of the underworld with his song. Effect. Plus 25% success rate in music-related skills of any kind. It even had the perk to make him a good singer, even so, he had no talent or knowledge whatsoever. The knowledge was crammed into his head the moment he activated the skill. The lack of talent made it so he was only a good singer. Had someone with actual talent gotten this skill, they could have become a superstar. The worst effect was, that his singing now sounded rather good and he already found himself subconsciously humming a tune. It felt a little inappropriate to hum a happy tune in front of the door of the boss room. He looked at the big door. Should he take a look at the boss? The guild had especially warned him not to enter the boss room. His goal was already reached and he had more than enough poison sacks. He could simply leave now and... Suddenly the gate shook. Hey! Are you coming in or not? Do you know how annoying it is if someone just stands at your door without doing anything? A roaring voice echoed from behind the door. I was just about to leave. Bye. No. Please. Don't leave. Do you know how many people just leave after killing the critter? I'm so lonely. Being a dungeon boss is so boring. Why don't they enter? Because I'm too strong, of course. I'm the mighty Lich Alzalsa. Oh great. I will leave now. No, no, no. Please stay. I swear I won't attack you if you enter. I need your help to leave his place. My help? How would I be able to help you? I'm stuck here since that stupid dungeon core summoned me as the boss. I can feel from your aura that you should have an ability that can help me release these shackles. Oh. Let me phrase this differently. Why should I help you? Releasing a powerful undead from those shackles, it does not quite strike me as a pro gamer move. A pro what? Anyway, I'm sure I won't be in a state to do any harm if it works like I hope it will. Explain first. The ability that had woken the Lich's interest was soul capture. It felt the passive attraction the skill used to automatically collect souls. It took the Lich half an hour before Seth agreed to its plan. The plan was not too complicated. Seth entered the boss room and took a few minutes to get used to the skeleton in a lavish ornamental robe and more jewelry than a street rapper. Even Mr. D would feel silly with this much bling. Definitely, the spiciest undead he had ever seen. Al did not pull the prank of slamming the door closed behind him. Not even as a joke. He also didn't attack him. He showed Seth the place where the Lich's phylactery was sealed by the dungeon core. Oddly enough, it was a long, delicate pipe covered with colorful paintings of golden clouds and dragons. Before the core could force Al to attack him, it was Soul Capture's time to shine. The last level up was not specifically the ability to remove souls from the items he made but to remove souls from items in general. According to the Lich's guess, the phylactery was not an exception. As long as the Lich allowed it, that is. Seth tried to capture the Lich's soul and was surprised by a massive wave of power slowly oozing out of the delicate pipe. It was not the size that surprised him, but the feeling of density the souls gave off. Fine cracks started to form on the ceramic pipe as the biggest part of the soul left the phylactery. The pipe turned to a cloud of fine glittery dust after Seth finally extracted the soul. The skeletal figure of the Lich Alzalsa turned to dust, leaving only a pile of dust. Ding! You have killed, Lich Alzalsa. Leave 180, you have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now leave 26. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now leave 27. Level 180. How hadn't leave 30 dungeon and leave 180 boss? Wasn't the experience a little too little with his kind of level difference? Was this because a lich was technically nothing but its soul? This meant it would be almost worth 180 levels of experience. The soul had to be at least epic then. He had not leveled up for so long, that he had almost forgotten about the perks of leveling up, FSP. With the 2-level UPS, he had 5 now. He needed 4 to level up his appraisal skill and would still have 1 left. Just great. As close as he was to journeyman rank now, this was the best option. Otherwise, he would be unable to appraise the materials he needed to level up quickly in this rank. Now he could see the information of the soul. Soul of Alzalsa, X, Ego, Crafting Material, Epic Plus. The soul of the great sorceress Alzalsa, who turned herself into a lich after suffering grievous wounds in the battle with a dragon. After 200 years of training to take revenge, Lich Alzalsa was suddenly pulled into the dungeon of a foreign dimension to work as a dungeon boss before she could ultimately slay her hated foe. Alzalsa was a girl and she wanted to fight a dragon, he mumbled, surprised. How did you know? Hey, did you appraise my soul? That's rude. You can't just stare at a woman's bare soul like this. Avoid your eyes already. He heard a feminine voice in his head, similar to how Puffles spoke to him. So this is what Ego meant. Her soul was not bigger in original size than the wyvern's soul, but it was a lot denser and contained several times the power. A soul that still contained an ego from before, would he be able to make an ego item like this? Hey, what's that glint in your eyes? Stop staring at me and loot my body, will ya? And don't forget to rob that damn dungeon core. Loot her corpse? But all that was left was a pile of dust. Seth shrugged and squatted down to rummage through the pile of fine powder. He did not see the need to use loot and potentially lose something good. He actually found 3 things in her remains. Chapter 133. Crawling out of the dungeon. In the pile of dust, he found 2 rings and a bone fragment. He could only appraise one of the rings and the bone. The other ring was probably out of his appraisal range. Dragon Bane. Epic. Durability 3400/4000. 1 plus 500% damage against Dragonkin. 2 weakens all dragons in a radius of 300 m. 3 immunity against draconic status effects. 4 plus 50% resistance against dragon fire. 5 minus 75% mana cost. A ring created by the great Lich Alzalsa, who almost slew a dragon and became a legend. Bone of Alzalsa, crafting material, epic. A bone fragment of great sorceress Alzalsa. After suffering a terrible wound from a dragon's attack, she turned herself into a powerful lich and swore revenge. As a lich, she almost slew the dragon and became a legendary existence. Almost became a legend, almost slew a dragon. What with all the almosts? Seth mumbled. It's this dungeon's fault. I was about to fulfill my revenge and kill that hateful dragon. I was casting a spell to finish that guy off and a teleportation formation suddenly appeared around me and I was summoned here. Oh, did I speak out loud? Sorry. But how can an leave 30 dungeon summon a boss at your level? Seth could not hold back his curiosity. It was lucky. That stinky dungeon master drew gotchas and randomly summoned me. If the dungeon had not automatically sealed me, I would have long taken this place apart. Do me a favor and punch the dungeon master for me. Now that she mentioned it. A dungeon boss and the master were not necessarily the same person. So where was this dungeon master? Seth could only see beyond the boss room. He's hiding behind that pillar over there. Go get him. The dungeon master was a small humanoid demon, an imp. It had run away and hidden the moment Seth's armor took effect. It was an absolute weakling. Impus leave 32. Seth went with calling it an imp. It was unable to communicate, but it seemed very afraid. Look at how pitiful it is, are you really telling me to hit it? It's only afraid because it stands no chance. Do you know how often this thing humiliated me by abusing its authority as the dungeon master? Hit it, I say. Smite it. Al actually shared some of her memories of the imp's actions. She had to serve it and got kicked and spit on by the arrogant little shit without a way to even resist. Seth gave the creature a mighty kick that smashed it against the dungeon wall. It wouldn't turn into a prince from this, would it? Then Seth used the great technique he had learned from Finn. Hey, you! Where is my reward? He poked the training sword's tip against the crystal core. With a tink, he continued. You wouldn't want me to crush you, right? There is no one protecting you now, or do you think that wimp will stand up to protect you? The next moment a treasure chest appeared beside the dungeon core. Now, don't be so stingy. I defeated and leave 180 boss. Don't you think your life is worth a little more? He could not just break the core without the guild's permission. But he could still threaten to do so. The next moment a second chest appeared beside the first. Core successfully mugged. The contents of the chests added up to about 45 gold in gold, silver and bronze coins. There were also some uncommon weapons, but nothing overwhelming. The only thing of slight interest was a thin silver bracelet. Bracelet of health. Uncommon. Durability 300. 1 immunity to uncommon diseases. 2.20% resistance against rare diseases. It was simple, but Seth could appreciate not getting sick. Diseases were one of the most annoying details in many survival and role-playing games. Health was even more precious in reality. It was a shame this was a dungeon item, so he would not be able to scan and copy these effects. I guess, I'm done here. I can finally leave this cursed place. Al stayed silent after he put the Lich's soul in his soul space. Seth appreciated this. He felt very nervous talking to a 200-year old soul of a Lich. Before reaching Aura, he used the new quick change function to swap to his travel clothes. Back in Aura he visited the guild, completed the quest, and finally returned to Tord's shop. A lot of things had happened on this trip that Wei only supposed to test his skills. How was it? The dwarven master greeted him as he stepped into the smithy. The dwarf was currently sharpening a short sword. Seth thought about how he had harvested the soul of a being that could probably wipe out Aura and decided to stay silent about that. He told Tord about the effects of the sword burning through the bugs like a hot knife through butter. You leveled up, right? Why don't you put some points into willpower? Maybe that will help with your headaches. Tord commented casually. Surprised face, he had completely forgotten to distribute his free attribute points. It had been so long since he last leveled up. He had 32 now and decided to put half of them into will, bringing it up to 55. He put 10 into agility and 5 into endurance. The last 2 increased his int to 35. He could easily feel the difference the increased willpower did when he started playing with a small blue flame. Now he felt like a mutant, just casually playing with a small flame in his hands. It felt really interesting. You done? Stop playing around, I already prepared your next tasks. Go get to work. When Seth got back to the crafting table and looked at the plans for the next item, he was supposed to make, he suddenly remembered. Oh yeah, I also got a passive skill that will increase my chances with singing. Tord's hands halted and his face paled. They had really tried to teach Seth singing and it had cost the dwarven master a lot. He was not mentally ready to listen to Seth singing again. On the other hand, he was a respected and powerful dwarven master. How could he be afraid of his disciples singing? His hand started grinding the sword again and he answered in a calm voice with a forced smile. That's great. Then we should test it out later. This was his burden to bear. He couldn't hinder his fosterling's growth just because he was afraid to lose his reason. That didn't mean he couldn't buy some time to mentally prepare. It was a week later, Seth's skills were slowly growing as he made the accessories and items Tord ordered him to make. Enchantment and goldsmith were closing in on leave 4 and he also started creating different weapons under the master's guidance, making his blacksmith grow, too. Today we will try out the new skill you mentioned. The dwarf suddenly said, wearing a pair of ear protectors. Seth knew his singing was bad, but did he really have to go this far? Feeling a little hurt, Seth grabbed a piece of steel to test out the effect of the skill on using a forging ballad. He started chanting a dwarven ballad that was supposed to ask a low-level earth spirit for its blessing and strengthen the material. A throaty deep chanting filled the smithy and drilled through Tord's ear protectors as if they were not even there. The master had to admit that the singing became a lot less nerve-wracking than before, but it still sounded very wrong and disharmonious. At this point, it was already clear this would end again in failure or a curse. Stop! Stop! Halt! No more! Shut up, Seth, a clear voice disrupted his work. An illusory figure stood behind him. It was a tall blurry-faced woman with a loose, very revealing robe and a boatload of jewelry. This is the wrong approach. You completely lack any kind of talent to communicate with the spirits and your translation function is completely tearing up the words, she said and waved her and dismissively. What do you mean? Wait, who are you? The dwarf stared and the ghost that had suddenly materialized in his smithy. I'm Alzalsa, the spiciest sorceress of whatever. Shut up, dwarf, I'm not talking to you. The dwarf suddenly made an awkward duck face. Tord's mouth was clamped shut and he could not open his lips, no matter how hard he tried. The Lich's souls that had not given any signs of life for the last week had suddenly projected an illusory figure beside him and offered advice. She even told his master to shut up. Okay, then I will ask. What do you mean? I have no talent to communicate with the spirits. And what does this have to do with my translation function? She sighed. You wouldn't understand it if I tried to explain. So, let's save time and accept that there are translation errors, okay? But even then, it would still have a slight effect, if you had good compatibility with spirits. Does that mean that my singing is not even that bad? Hope was rising in his voice. What? No. Without that skill your singing would be horrible. A metaphorical shattering could be heard as Al smashed his hopes with a sledgehammer. Does it mean that I really have to give up on forging ballads? She patted his shoulder. No. You just have to choose the songs better. Try this one. An illusory finger pointed at his forehead and knowledge started pouring into his brain. It was a new ballad in a completely foreign and archaic language. It has a similar effect to the one you just tried to use. It will help strengthen the weapon. Yurk, it's really hard to use magic without a medium for my soul. I will come back after some rest. With that, she simply vanished. Tord ripped open his mouth with a loud gasp. What was that? Seth was belatedly forced to explain what had happened in the dungeon. Chapter 134. New Ballad. You are telling me that was the manifestation of a 200+ years old lich you released from a dungeon? Tord asked in disbelief. That about sums it up, Seth answered meekly. And she just taught you a foreign forging ballad? Yes. Seth was not sure whether he wanted to really use this ballad that was taught to him. What if it was dangerous? Or not a forging ballad? He did not really trust Al, yet. Let's try it, the dwarven master said with excitement visible in his eyes. It's been a long time since I saw a new forging ballad. And this should be an ancient one, considering that Lich is more than 200 years old and from a different world. It was painfully obvious that this old man was a forging geek. He couldn't wait to learn something new if it was connected to his profession. He did not even put the ear protectors back on when Seth got ready to start again. The song leaving his lips was nothing the dwarf had ever heard before. Different from his previous tries, Seth immediately felt a connection, despite not knowing the language. A deep disharmonious song filled the smithy and at first, it sounded unsettling and appalling to the two listeners. But on second thought there was a layer of demonic charm swinging within the deep chaotic melody. He felt his mana saturate his voice and the song kept urging them to keep singing, to keep listening. Finally, as Seth kept singing a string of dark reddish runes slowly left his lips. Like a snake they slithered through the air and fell onto the steel he kept forging and folding on the anvil. At this point, there was no stopping. Seth kept singing and forging and the steel turned darker and darker as more and more of these runes found their place within the metal. Seth forged it into a short saber, a yatagan. He had kept practicing this shape for the snake and wyvern fangs. Now it had inexplicably surfaced in his mind. The compulsion to sing finally ended when the blade had taken shape. Ding! You have succeeded in using a forging ballad for the first time. You gained bonus proficiency. He really did it. This was not some curse or failed product. With the bonus, his enchantment finally reached level 4. He could not wait for the finished product and appraised the unfinished blade. Feasting blade, crafting material, rare. The blade of a short saber originally made of steel. It had been slightly blessed by a high-ranking blood demon and changed into feasting steel. The material will heal and strengthen by feasting upon the blood of its victims. HOH, so this a demonic ballad. Tord suddenly appeared beside him. Sweat covered his forehead and he seemed tired as if he himself was the one forging just now. Demonic. Seth was not sure what he should think about this. Remembering his previous fails, did he have the talent to ask demons for assistance, instead of spirits? It explained why he ended up with so many cursed weapons and peculiar effects. It imbued the blade with the inherent ability to heal and strengthen itself. That's pretty good. You even managed to increase the rating of the steel, he said appreciatingly. You should finish this weapon. It might become really powerful if you enchant it with bleeding and life steel. I don't know. I don't really want to mess with something like demons. Stop worrying for now. You already did the enchantment. No need to hesitate at this point, he encouraged Seth. Seth followed the dwarf's advice. Life steal was a complex enchantment while bleeding counted as simple. Since he reached the adept rank, he could put either two simple enchantments on an item or combine a simple and a complex one. After finishing the hilt, he carved the circuits for bleeding and life steal into the reddish dark blade. Ding! The effects are in synergy and will experience a substantial growth. Blood drink or Yatagon. Rare. Damage, 350. Durability, 1500. 1 will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen itself. 2 will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen the user. 3 skill bleed. An excellent weapon made by an aspiring blacksmith. This weapon shows greatly improved performance owing to special treatment. Bleed mana cost, 50 cooldown 60 SEC. Plus 200% chance to cause bleeding. Plus 50% chance to cause strong bleeding. Strengthen the user? Would it be like in some novel, where the protagonist could steal attribute points from his victims? Nah, that would be too powerful for a simply rare-rated weapon. Unless it had a good performance considering the base material was high-quality steel and he didn't use soul infusion on it. And it would even keep growing stronger. Just imagine how good this would be if he used a better material like mithril for this. Or if he used something that fit the demonic nature. What was he thinking? He didn't want to mess with such entities. Even if he had the talent to hug demonic thighs. Well, maybe. He should ask Al when she rested up. Until then he would not do that again. For now, he decided to just continue with Tord's tasks until the Lich called again. It took another week of peaceful crafting before the Lich sorceress ghost spoke again. In the meantime, he had visited the human district of Aura but had not found Mina, Finn, or one of the other guys. He had looked for Bertram to meet Marn, but the elf had also vanished after starting his tutelage under his new master. Was their timing really this bad, or did something happen? They wouldn't avoid him, would they? He decided to leave a message for them with the guild since the guild would not hand out information on running quests. They were B ranks, they could simply visit him at the shop once they were back. Feeling slightly down, he cheered himself up by splurging on a meal before returning to the halls of stone. Al appeared once he closed the shop's door behind him. Would it hurt to take my soul out of that weird space of yours? Do you have any idea how much power I have to spend to astral project myself out of there? She said before vanishing again. Seth had no idea that storing souls had also the effect to seal them. He went to his room and released the soul of the sorceress from his space. Finally, outside. Not cool, man. I thought you would bring me out for a conversation after I talked to you, but you simply kept me away for another week. I even gifted you a forging ballad. Oh yeah, how did that work out? Seth felt a little overwhelmed by the flood of words flowing in his mind. Sorry. I forgot that we could talk like this, too. HMP, don't lie. You just wanted to ogle my astral body. Admit it, she accused self-assertive. It's not like I don't like the view, but I really just... I'm joking, wait, wah. Forget it. Anyway, how did the ballad work? Seth explained to the Lich what had happened and the effects. Haha. As I thought. You have a great affinity with demons, considering that horrible musical talent of yours. It's a shame I don't know many demonic ballads. I, with my angelic voice and talent, lack the affinity with demons. I'm also not a blacksmith, so I only learned those for research. But isn't it dangerous to mess with demons? Using these ballads wouldn't mess with my mind or the user's mind, right? Or summon a demon. And I don't really want to create the kind of demonic weapons that take control of their wielder. PFF, where did you get those dumb ideas? Why don't you worry about that when asking spirits and elementals to bless your weapon? They are no bit better than demons when it comes to this. Using ballads is a simple trade of entertainment for a blessing. Well, demons will also take mana, but that's the only difference. She fell silent for a moment. If you really want to summon demons, you should consider Bard as your second class. Then you could even learn more ballads because of the class specific. What? A second class? Seth interrupted her. This was the first time someone mentioned a second class. Oh, whoops. Forget that, you aren't supposed to know that. Too late. Tell me. No tee-hee, not for free. What do you want? A new physical medium. I will also teach you the other demonic ballads I know. Deal. It seemed like she really didn't like being a soul. Deal. Chapter 135. Lich in a bottle. Puffles, are you in here? Seth asked carefully. He had left the caterpillar in this room for several weeks and only met him to eat together. He had left the eye-visor here to make his new alloy threads. QQ? Is it time to eat already? Or will you finally free me from this slave task? The room was filled with wool made of celestial bronze with some orderly reels stacked to the side. It would soon be enough to visit Nadal for a new jacket. Arim, no. I just wanted to get some celestial bronze, he said, a little ashamed. A full reel flew towards his face, with force. He would better take the eye-visor with him the next time he went to town. Thanks, Puff. Let's go eat out tomorrow, what do you think? Cure. Alright. But don't think that enough to make me forgive you. Seth decided to use some of the eye-visor's bronze as part of Alzalsa's medium. He had noticed early on that the energy of the eye-visors was similar to that of souls, so he guessed that it would have good compatibility with his skills. Originally Al gave him a blueprint and a complicated list of materials that were needed to make a new kind of phylactery that she could possess. Seth had different plans. For this, he summoned his full soul smithy and pulled out Karen's obel. The first step was forging a small frame from mithril to guarantee the durability of the item. It was big enough to fit something the size of a dog tag. The next material he brought out was the bone fragment of Alzalsa he had found in the bone pile. What is all this? Asked the main ingredient when he brought it out. Seth had not used any of his class skills since he met the Lich, so she had no idea about his abilities. He put the bone and the soul on the anvil and started activating soul infusion. Hey, what are you trying to do? What is this weird force? Using the hammer's special skill together with energy circulation, he started to forge the bone. Under her constant commentary and complaints, he slowly melded the Lich's soul into the bone fragment. No, stop. This is not what I wanted. I wanted she kept on struggling, putting huge pressure on Seth's mental force. It was a big difference between a powerful Leave 180 soul with ego and the small one he had used before. At this moment he was very glad that he had boosted his willpower. Especially stretching out some parts from her soul to infuse into other parts like the frame took a lot out of him. Finally, he had thoroughly melded the soul into the bone of its former body and distributed his evenly throughout the dog tag-sized bone plate he had forged. Ouch, this hurt. This won't work. I don't know what you are planning, but I will be able to detach my soul from this with enough time. I told you to make me a phylactery. Oh, don't worry. That's because I'm not finished yet. Do you really think I would simply help resurrect an overpowered Lich? Don't worry too much. If you prove trustworthy, I can still make you this substitute file whatever. Seth had no idea whether this would actually work, but he could always release her again with soul capture. He had no idea what would happen, but he looked forward to seeing results. He set the bone plate into the mithril frame and used small pins at the sides to create a mechanical connection. Then he infused a small part of the soul he had set aside into the flame, creating a magical connection. On the top and the bottom, the frame had small holes. On the bottom he fixed a tassel made from celestial bronze, and at the top, he used a string from the same material so he could tie it to his belt. Something he found out when experimenting was that when he used the energy circulation skill with the engraving tool, he could engrave organic material by displacing material, instead of removing it. It came handy in this case, where he had not much material and it was very precious on top of it. On the front of the bone, he carved the figure of Alzalsa, or at least the silhouette of her astral projection he had seen. Ouch! It hurts. Why does this hurt? The sorceress kept whining in his ears as he worked with utmost concentration. Except for using a skill to not lose any material, this work was purely for aesthetics. On the backside, he carved the complex circuit for mana gathering and the simple circuit for a bonus in willpower. And now the most important step. Wait. Hey, what is it with this water barrel? I can feel a really dangerous aura from this. Don't put me in there. No. Seth dunked the sorceress into the waters of Styx. Hi. What is this? HNG, This doesn't feel too bad. Ding! You have successfully created an ego item for the first time. All stats +1. Ding! Title, Bad Boy gained. You have thrust an unwilling lady into cold water. Increased intimacy with females who like an aggressive approach. Another weird skill had come along his way, he was too tired to still complain about these undeserved titles. It irked him more, that many of his attributes he had finally evened out on 5s and 0s had become 1s and SIXS. It was great to gain points, but it didn't look as good. His mood improved a lot when he looked at the new item and the proficiency he got for it. He got almost 10% through the board for all 3 crafting skills. Ding! You have created your first epic rated item. All stats +2. Token of the Sorceress. Epic. Durability, 1800. 1 Summon the Sorceress Alzalsa for 1h once a week. 2 + 24 willpower. 3 mana regeneration, +5 mana/minute. This token houses the soul and consciousness of the great sorceress Alzalsa who almost became a legend. Usage condition, Alzalsa's approval. Compared with the option of summoning a powerhouse for 1 hour, his enchantment seemed more like a blemish on the token, than an improvement. With this, our deal is finished. Can you still hear me? Yeah, I can still communicate with you. Seth's eyes shone. Can you tell me about the second class you mentioned? No. What? But I gave you a physical medium. That was the deal. At level 50 you will be able to get a secondary job. I won't tell any more. Although it's not bad, this was not the medium I wanted. Oh really? Can you still say this, now? Yeah, I can. What should have cha? Surprised face. Seth had used the summoning option of the token and before him stood a beautiful older woman in a loose robe revealing a lot of well-tanned smooth skin. She was made of flesh and blood and stared at him with an expression of disbelief. This warmth. I can feel the air. I can breathe. I can taste the smoke in the air. Tears started to well up in her big green almond-shaped eyes. 200 years. I lived in a cold unresponsive husk. How did you do it? I looked so long for a way to get back a fleshly body and you simply. I have no idea how it works. Also, this only lasts for 1 hour once a week. How is your power? Seth had noticed that it had no option to strengthen his own mana as the soul equipment had. Was it because he directly infused it into the item? The point was if he didn't get a boost, it either vanished or Al controlled it. It was a shame he didn't get the mana boost, but it would not be so bad if he could have her fight for him in the worst case scenario. The beautiful sorceress calmed down a little upon his question. It was a valid point to test, so she gripped her fists and the air in the room became heavy with mana. I have about a third of my original mana. I guess the rest goes into maintaining this body for the hour you mentioned. She suddenly licked her lips. Since I only have 1 hour, we should thoroughly test this body. With that, the loose robe slid off her body. You can't be serious. It's been more than 200 years. I am more than serious. They spent the precious hour doing the fun things in life. Seth was unable to walk normally for the next 2 days. Chapter 136. A pickle. Kaye. Screams and explosions filled the previously quiet night. The company of merchants was attacked by an overwhelming horde of monsters. Corpse walkers led by a pack of lycanthropes. Now, if Seth had been here, he would not have called these things werewolves. They had a big, bulky stature and were almost naked with thick leathery skin. Their heads resembled a wolf's skull with terrible burn scars. These were demon worshippers transformed by drinking the blood of a specific archdemon. The corpse walkers were a similar creation. The name was chosen by those who had to confront them on the battlefield. Once normal people and commoners of the northern territories, they had turned into these sick abominations after being hit by a curse or drinking water poisoned with demon blood. Their skin was dried and wrinkled with a texture and defense like tough hardened leather. The deep, sunken eyes only hungered for fresh meat and blood. They got their name because they had no more intelligence and walked around like zombies. But despite looking and acting like the undead, they were still alive, making them immune against many countermeasures that worked on the undead. The company had left Aura several weeks ago and had taken the risk to travel further north close to the front line of the war with the demon worshippers. The merchants estimated to still be far away from the battle and wanted to sell supplies to the fortified cities that may be soon entangled in battle. They were wrong. The enemy moved faster than anyone expected and they were stuck as they laid siege on the second city they visited. Unfortunately, Uelikat's fur was part of their escort and also stuck in this small city they didn't even know the name of. The human territories were able to come up with a countermeasure to the demonic curses, but their troops were far inferior to the cursed soldiers that roamed the lands. Trying to survive the situation, all adventurers and soldiers of the town were recruited to defend the walls and gates. As dangerous and cumbersome as the constant fighting was, there was an advantage. As the defender, they were in an advantageous position and could literally slaughter dozens of enemies. Their levels rose with unprecedented speed. Finn, Mina, and the rest of the party all finally reached Level 50, the original minimum to become B ranks. And they were finally able to grab one of the reasons B ranks had a qualitative change in power, compared to C ranks. The secondary class. A second class gave not only new skills but also changed the modifiers of attributes by at least double or more, depending on the class. It was similar to how Seth had about double the attribute points than regular people because of his race. It came at the price of needing double the experience per level past 50. It explained why B rank quests would normally deal with beasts and situations a single B ranks party couldn't handle alone. It was all for the experience. Their boost in strength came a little too late to make a change in the situation as the rations were running out and the authorities became desperate. They knew there was no hope for reinforcements from the surrounding regions. Nobody answered their messages, they might even be the last city still standing. Those who answered were too far away or close to a crisis themselves. So, they decided. Before the troops became starved and weakened, they would attempt to break through. The soldiers would buy time for the citizens to flee from the encirclement. They knew this would cost many lives, but at least some people would have the chance to survive. Dash! Finn's fist smashed Alikan's head like it was a piñata. She had originally wanted to take a class that was already similar to her current class. Something like a monk to increase her survivability and supporter qualities. Everything came a little different when she saw the options she could choose from. Changing one's class and choosing a second class was a little different from Seth's first experience in getting a class. To begin with, people born into the system are born with a class. To change it they needed to visit the system church. In a dark room, one would see a random class wheel but also options based on all the qualifications they had, like current class, former classes, skills, race, etc. Choosing a second class had the same option and different class wheels on top of it. The system was a little nicer to those who had already reached Level 50, so instead of a random class wheel with everything, there were wheels split into different categories. Why would someone use a class wheel instead of a known option? In case one had little to no qualification, or there was no option of interest. The fairy had ample experience with the procedure, as expected from someone with a unique class, and she instantly knew her choice when she saw it. It was a second unique class called Melee Queen. It did not only increase her overall combat prowess in melee combat but also added melee attack skills of a royal theme. This was what she had always lacked as a battle cleric. The royal theme came from the fact that these skills derived part of their damage from the dignity stat she owned from her inheritance as a noble. As such, her fighting style had become a lot more elegant and dignified while packing an even greater devastating power. Like an animalistic savageness hidden behind a sophisticated facade. Royal indeed. It was almost tailor-made for her, the big advantage of a unique class. In a place further away from the head disintegrating fairy, a horde of corpse walkers was diced and swept away by a circular wave of shadows. The next moment a dark figure appeared behind the shocked Lekan that commanded this troop and stabbed a bright blade into the crown of his head. It easily penetrated the leathery skin and thick skull. In a dazzling light, the dying Lekan's brain was fried by lightning. This needed to be done, so it would not rise again as an undead. Heavily panting, Mina stood above the body of the fallen Lekan. She had not just gotten a secondary class, but also changed her primary one. Based on her experience thanks to Seth's equipment, she chose Shadow Assassin as a primary class and took Shadow Mage as a secondary class. Shadow Assassin was a rare-rated class and a common specialization for most assassins. It maximized the ability to hide from enemies' eyes. Shadow Mage on the other hand was an uncommon class, a specialization of Dark Mage. Beastmen seldomly had the talent for caster classes. How did Mina get this class then? It was Mina's lucky hand. None of the options she had satisfied her, and they were not exactly in a situation where she had a lot of time to ponder or gain skills to change her option. They were in the middle of a siege. She chose to use the class wheel of dark professions. In the worst case, she would get a class that was of not much help but still get some boost. Best case scenario, something like Shadow Mage. With these two classes, she got the skills to hide and travel through shadows. She could either strike like an assassin or hide and chant shadow magic to attack. The only disadvantage was that she lacked mana for the magic skills. She was an assassin for most of her career, she had no reason to invest her precious point into intelligence. So, despite the class modifiers and caster skills that boosted mana, her mana pool was pitiful. The other party member had also powered up in a similar fashion, which was the whole reason why they got confident in breaking through together with the other B ranks and their employer, the merchant company. They were still hard-pressed to get away from the pursuing army of undead. The only purpose of these minions was to stall them until the big hots of the enemy. Yul Katzfer and the other B-rank party hired by the merchants were already exhausted after several ambushes of this kind. All of them joined the merchants on the carriage and the driver spurred the horses on. It would still take another week before they reached Aura, and it was unsure how far the enemy forces had already invaded. Aura was located on the east side of the central mountain range and almost at the halfway point between south and north. They met enemies just a week's journey away from there. Nobody expected that the army of demon worshippers had already gotten this far south. Everyone was exhausted, the horses, the merchants, the adventurers, and even the carriage made dangerous creaking noises as they traveled at full speed. They were in a real pickle. Chapter 137. Looking for Group. It had a high price, but the sorceress kept her word. She taught and explained to him the demonic ballads she knew. Tord was wary at first, but when Seth explained everything to him, he helped Seth learn and train the new forging ballads. It was finally time that forging weapons was also included in his curriculum again. Having changed to demonic ballads also gave Orpheus' voice a chance to shine, even so the songs themselves were nothing one would listen to for enjoyment. His days were packed with grinding, making jewelry and accessories, weapons with forging ballads, and sparring with the dwarf. Time flew by and one day his age turned to 24. How long had it been since he left home? How far had he come? Status: no items equipped. Name: Seth Smith. Mark of Ivisor. Title: Faster Than the Thought. Level: 27. EXP: 2%. Race: Orihuma. Sex: male. Age 24. Class: Spirit Blacksmith, unique. Affiliation: System Church. Health: 1000/1000. Mana: 380. Strength 73. Dexterity 71. Agility: 53. Intelligence 38. Willpower 58. Endurance 58. Personality 17. Luck 21. Free AP, Attribute points 0. Free SP, Skill points 1. Defense. Physical, 224, 174 plus 50, ENDX 3. Magical, 141, 116 plus 25, WILX 2. Fire immunity. Poison resistance, 15%. Skill window. Blacksmith, Adept, Leave 9, 23%. Enchantment, Adept, LV8, 24%. Goldsmith, Adept, Leave 7, 17%. Blacksmith size Leave 5. Blueprint, Adept, Leave 3. Soul Infusion Leave 3. Spirit Smithy Leave 5. Spirit Capture Leave 4. Spirit Forging, Adept, Leave 1. Orpheus Voice, Passive, Leave 3. Weapon Mastery, Expert, Leave 3, 2%. Calm Reaction, Passive, Leave 7. Fear Resistance, Passive, Leave 8. Poison Resistance, Passive, Leave 3. Fire Affection, Passive, Leave 6. Pyrokinesis, Ability, Leave 2. Map Leave 4. Observation Leave 4. Concealment Leave 4. Energy Circulation Leave 9. Sewing, Beginner, Leave 6, 45%. Universal Translation Leave Max. Enchantment had grown a little faster because he trained it with weapons and jewelry now, but all his skills were getting close to the next rank. Everything was slowly rising, except for the skills he could hardly grind in safety. Seth had lost the urge to leave the workshop lately. Finn and the party still had not returned and Aura was slowly suffocating under the flood of refugees. The times he went out, he stayed in the halls of stone to eat and drink with Puffles, and Seth had managed to appease the starved sorceress with other joys of life, like food. This meant he would have a huge food bill once every week. It was the price to keep her robe from slipping. Today was his birthday and he wanted to go out. He even invited Tord to come along, and the reclusive dwarf decided to accompany him. Tord told him that he knew a very good restaurant in Aura and Seth had not heard of it yet. The dwarven master led them out of the halls of stone and to the commercial district. He also tried to invite Vathan and Marn, but could not find either of them. The human district had changed tremendously. The alleys apart from the main roads were filled with homeless people and refugees. It was less bustling with life and more beggars filled the streets. Apparently, the human territories were on a losing streak and refugees kept flooding south. The situation was so bad, that the guards at the gates had the order to keep those out. They heard that a kind of slum city had grown outside the city walls. Thousands of people living in tents and makeshift shacks strangled the trade routes, and merchants avoided the cities hit hardest by this development. He followed the dwarven master off the main streets and into the alleys. The restaurant he brought Seth to was on the smaller side and off the busy places, similar to Seth's shop. Tord had assured him that this was one of the best restaurants he knew in Aura. That was why Seth didn't judge yet and stayed open for a surprise. And he did well in doing so. The restaurant had a small and comfortable feel to it and offered private booths for customers. Seth, Puffles, and Tord sat down there and looked at the menu. The restaurant served traditional dwarven cuisine, which meant everything was very hearty, savory, and served in big quantities. It was perfect for the trio of heavy eaters. It was the first incident of a chef not despairing upon seeing Seth and Puffle enter the feeding frenzy. The dwarf in the open kitchen saw them devouring his and accepted their challenge. The blacksmith, the master, and the caterpillar stalked for a moment when they felt the aura of a predator. As if a sleeping dragon had awoken, they felt the might of the dwarven chef oozing from the kitchen. With experienced movements and skilled hands, the chef ramped up his cooking speed. The three could barely follow his hand speed as he cut, cooked, and seasoned his ingredients. They acknowledged the chef's caliber and appreciated his efforts by eating even faster. Now it was the chef's turn to feel pressured. Seeing the food vanish the moment the waiter put the dish on their table, it felt like a magic trick. Did they really eat the food, or did they teleport it straight into their stomachs? Both parties did their best in this battle of skill and stomach capacity. The unbelievable outcome was a definitive draw as both sides collapsed. The restaurant closed for the day after the three waddled out with bulging bellies. They had eaten almost all the ingredients the restaurant had prepared for the day. The trio left the restaurant and Seth re-equipped the sorceress token. He had found out that he could make her shut up by putting her in his inventory. She had been constantly nagging and complaining about how they dared to just go and eat without her. Unfortunately, the summon was still on cooldown. It was when they stepped on the main street and went on their way back to the halls that they heard screams and commotion from the direction of the city gate. A crowd of refugees, beggars, and citizens came running in their direction. From the gates sounded the horns that signaled an attack, and the air was filled by the rattling of giant chains as the city gates were completely sealed off. Followed by the impacts of giant bolts that locked the gate and made it as strong, if not stronger than the walls around it. It didn't end there. After the gates closed, a magic shield rose from the city walls and closed off Aura's airspace as it joined with the tall cliff wall at the back of the city. At first, they wondered why the barrier was raised, but soon dark spots appeared in the sky above Aura. A mix of flying creatures filled the air above Aura. Some were humanoid with bat wings and spears, others seemed like completely deformed beasts and birds. Just what is this? Seth could not help but ask. They had found a corner to hide from the panicking crowd. How would I know? I bet that guy over there will tell us soon enough, the dwarf said and pointed at an especially big humanoid creature with goat legs and bat wings. It looked like a genuine devil. 1. Ancient priests imagined to scare people. Your time has come, dwarven worms, it bellowed so it could be heard in the whole city. Your soft heart has opened us your doors. All the vermin that fled here have turned into our troops. Your pathetic walls cannot stop us. It let out a high-pitched screech, and suddenly a great part of the beggars and refugees that had just rushed into the city started attacking anyone in their sight. It was like a scene from a zombie apocalypse movie as they started to bite people and rip them open with their bare hands. And here started the distinct difference to a modern scenario. They simply didn't just run away crying for help. The refugees had no way to defend themselves, but among them were many adventurers and merchants, or well-off citizens who switched to armor and defensive gear to protect their own life. In a city like Aura, common armor could often be bought for cheap, so many people opted to have at least some kind of life insurance in their inventory. Wealthy traders would sometimes have better equipment than adventurers, despite being non-combatants in general. The horde of corpse walkers was slowed down by groups of defiant citizens and adventurers on break. Seth and Tord also equipped their gear and jumped into the fray. Unlike the two blacksmiths, that were able to mow down the corpse walkers. The citizens and adventurers were slowly overwhelmed by the refugees that had turned into monsters. Haha, you can try to struggle, but you will all become our slaves in the end. The demon in the air roared and smashed a giant staff against the barrier, trying to break it. Shit, there are so many of them. Tord, Seth and Puffles were fighting back to back with the help of other adventurers. It's okay, we just have to buy time for the defenseless to get away. This situation will soon be dealt with, the dwarf answered confidently. Older adventurers and the few dwarfs among the defenders had a similarly confident expression, while the younger ones were becoming nervous. As if to answer the demon's claim, horns sounded from the direction of the gates and were answered by an even louder horn from the golden gates of the halls of stone. The next moment a magic spark shot along the city walls and a shock traveled through the barrier. Outside the barrier, it created an energy wave that unceremoniously disintegrated the enemy's whole air force, only leaving the big demon with horrendous scorch marks behind. Its red skin was blistering and oozing blood. Ugh, this will not stop us. We will. Out of my sight, demon scum. An enraged roar interrupted the demon and made the city tremble. The next moment a mighty energy beam, originating from the golden gates, penetrated the demon's chest and it exploded. At the gates stood a wizened dwarf. Its bald head reflected the rays of the sun and the smooth white beard reached down to his feet. He wore a majestic magical robe and held a thick staff with a big crystal ball at the tip. Even the corpse walkers halted at the sight of the giant energy beam that had just illuminated the city. Dear citizen, there is no need to panic. I, Mayor Ray, will not let any more harm come to you. It followed several chantless lightning strikes, that jumped across all the corpse walkers like chain lightning and turned most of them into charred corpses, without the walking part. This was inside the city. Outside the city looked like a lightning storm as a myriad of strikes descended around the city. This was the most flashy and mighty magic Seth had seen so far. The sight rivaled the giant hanging tree covering a whole city with its crown. Just what level was the mayor? Chapter 138. Happy birthday! They had to ditch the carriage and the horses a long time ago. The horse met their end and the carriage's wheels broke. They had been running for a week with barely any sleep or rest. They had food, but no time to eat. They had already been on the run for more than a week. The traders had already lost their lives a few days ago. Volko was supporting Mike, who had a festering wound on his hip. The priest was unable to heal even after his power boost. Mina was scouting their way and they were finally reaching the vicinity of Aura. Only to find that the enemy was already in front of them. The city was surrounded by hordes of corpse walkers and other monsters. They came just in time to see the army be decimated by a storm of lightning. Where it hit it would jump between several tens of monsters and turn them into charcoal. The field of lighting kept expanding even past them. One of the other B-rank was suddenly hit and turned into a terrifying lycanthrope before dying. It had been among them the whole time. Once the lightning slightly died down, they dared to come near the city. The land surrounding the city was filled with charred corpses. They had finally reached Aura, obviously a safe place. Except for Finn's and Lix's golden robes, all their armors and weapon were damaged from the long journey and endless fighting. What would Seth say when they finally meet him after weeks of silence? The sorry-looking party reached the locked gates of Aura an hour later. They called for help and entry but got no answers. After sitting at the foot of the gate for a while, finally, the smaller gate opened. A tall knight in terrifying black armor wielding a unique hammer was the first to step out. The second was a dwarven warrior with a great axe clad in bright silver armor. As the leader of the party, Mike got off the ground despite his injury. Please, let us in. We have injured people that need treatment. He gestured towards the party leader of the other party, that was even worse off than him after he took a hit protecting them in a critical moment. Guys, they heard a surprised voice from the terrifying knight. It sounded somewhat echoey but familiar. The knight lifted his visor. Seth, the group exclaimed. At the urging of the sorceress, Seth had decided to join the scouting party to assess the situation outside the gates. Seth had understood her reason after taking a look at the open field outside the city. Many remnant souls were left behind by these creatures, more than he had ever seen at once. There were even quite a few medium-sized souls among them. Who knew that he would meet the group of friends he had been looking for weeks, out here at the gate? They looked really miserable as they sat there dirty, injured, and in their damaged gear. He was the disciple of one of the city's 3 dwarven masters, so his words had quite some weight among the dwarven guards. Not to forget his master was right beside him. With these two vouching for the party, they were quickly taken into the city to meet the healers. Seth and Tord on the other side stepped out onto the battlefield of this one-sided massacre. He only needed to walk around and the souls gravitated towards him and vanished into his soul space. A party of ragtag Birangs accompanied the two as they inspected the battlefield. Technically their job was just to make sure that everything died to the mayor's lightning and there would not be any weird surprises. Who knew what the sick lunatics were able to cook up? After what had happened today, nobody could really be sure. Despite so many people dying here and gaining almost 350 small souls, there were no uncommon souls among them. He would have guessed to find some with a grudge, maybe they died simply too fast? He also found almost 30 medium-sized souls. With this much, he was sure that he would be able to level up soul infusion and soul forging at least once. This calamity was really a blessing in disguise. He thanked the Lich for telling him to come out here, otherwise, he would have missed this chance. It was really a great birthday present. The sky was slowly becoming dark when they returned to the city. They could not find anything wrong with the corpses left after the mayor's attack. Since it was deemed safe, the city would send out a troop of people to clean up the remnants the next day. Seth unequipped the Dark Knight armor and everyone around him let out a sigh of relief. "Hey guys, I'm glad you made it to my birthday," he greeted the party in the medical wing of the guard garrison. Lixis, Bulko, Mina, and Finn looked tired and bruised but were fine otherwise. Mike was lying down on a bed with a doctor still working on the wound at his side. Mina and Finn jumped up and clung to him like frightened puppies. What was happening? He had just stepped in and suddenly had two beauties hugging him tightly with tears in their eyes. Mina pressed her face against his chest while the fairy was hugging his face, smearing snot and tears on his cheek. He tried to think of something smart, or a joke, but he ended up simply hugging them back. "I missed you, too. The poison dagger you gave me broke, please give me a new one," the cat girl whispered in a pitiful voice. This was a low blow after he became so emotional. "Ah, no fair. My robe has a cut and the durability fell below half, please fix it for me," the fairy stepped forward to ram another dagger in his already wounded heart. "You too, brute." Seeing his hurt face, both started laughing. It was them who made a cruel joke at his expense this time. In response, he hugged them tighter. After the doctor was done and left, they sat together and talked about what had happened during the last weeks, since they last met. When the sky got dark, Seth left so they could finally get their well-deserved rest after such a long journey. All in all, this was not the worst birthday Seth ever had in his life. Chapter 139.com Days. Aura was on high alert for the next few days. Seth and Tord had secluded themselves in their workshop as they did not feel like dealing with any of what was happening outside. Instead, Seth made new items for the group part of his training. He knew they were past level 50 and had chosen their secondary classes, but they could not tell him about it before he reached the point himself. They could only tell him their primary class and what they wanted or lacked at this juncture. For the most part, he simply repaired and improved the item he had made for them. For Mina, he went as far as using 3 mid-sized souls. He made her a robust dagger made from dark steel to match her Shadow's assassin class and layered everything he had onto it. Feasting dagger. Rare, growth. Damage 550. Durability 1500. 1 will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen itself. 2 will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen the user. 3 plus 10% affinity to darkness. 4 plus 15% damage in dark places. 5 plus 50 damage mana cost, 15/SEC. A black dagger with a dangerous aura made by an aspiring blacksmith. It has a demonic desire for blood and has the potential to grow past its current rating. On top of that, he made 2 rings from dark steel that each raised affinity to darkness by 5% and mana by 130 each. For Bulko, he made a mace from the blessed mana steel that was left over from making weapons for the army. He used soul infusion during the forging since a demonic ballad was obviously not fit for the weapon of a priest. Besides the option to increase mana that came from the soul, he also enchanted it like a staff with mana efficiency and magic damage amplification. Technically it was now a staff that would really hurt if someone was hit with it. Even more than a regular one. Mike's sword was broken in the siege and Seth had to make a new one from scratch. Mike had become a magic swordsman, so Seth used regular mana steel for the sword and gave it similar enchantments like Bulko's mace. He didn't know what kind of magic Mike would be casting, so he kept it neutral instead of giving it fire damage again. Turning normal weapons into something rivaling a caster's staff without a magic focus was possible thanks to soul infusion. It was Al the Lich who explained the concept to him. Normally a staff would have something like a crystal as a focus where mana could be collected and amplified. By turning the whole item into a body housing a soul, it could take on the same function. Melee weapons for caster classes were not an uncommon thing, but Seth could save a lot of money by not needed this most expensive part. This didn't mean he would suddenly start selling such items. The souls were too precious to be wasted on random strangers for some gold. His blacksmith only rose by a few % after doing all this. Enchantment was not much better. Only goldsmith budged a little. He knew this feeling. All of them had entered the level range just before the rank up and it became ultra hard to level them, even with the right materials. As for Lixus and Finn, he would have to visit Nadal to repair their robes. His sewing skill was way too low to touch them. This came at an opportune time. Seth estimated that there was now enough celestial bronze for an upgraded version of his gambeson. He would bring the man the material when went to ask him to repair the robes. Sweat running down his forehead, Seth sat down and finally took a break. He had finished everything in just 2 days, he had gotten very fast even without using his soul smithy. Yo! You are finally taking a break, the dwarf walked into the workshop. There is someone waiting for you outside, he said with a raunchy smile. Seth stepped out and saw Mina waiting in the shop. Today she wore a rather normal outfit, almost prim for her standards. Hi, I wanted to invite you to a meal, she slightly stuttered and even blushed. Just what had happened to her? He agreed to come with her after he washed up and wore a fresh set of clothes. As they left, she even tucked her arm into his and leaned against him. They wandered through the streets of the Hall of Stones and finally entered a small but nice restaurant. The meal was nice and the catgirl awkwardly tried to start a conversation which soon turned into a pleasant dialogue. Mina tried really hard to hold back and actually have a nice and normal date with him, but it soon devolved into a drinking competition that once again ended with them waking up in some small room at an inn. It finally broke out of her. With a reddened face and close to tears she admitted that she had attempted to have a normal date with him. A prim Mina is nice for a change, he hugged her tightly, but I prefer the one that tries to drink me under the table, he said with a grin as he saw her blush wildly. After spending the morning with Mina, he went back to work. He visited Nadal's shop with all the celestial bronze Puffles had made so far and the 2 robes Finn and Lixus had left with him. Seth! Are you okay? The old man greeted him. Aura was in an uproar after what happened recently and had not completely calmed down yet. Oh yeah, everything fine. I came because I have something for you. He smiled as he saw the tailor's eyes starting to shine. Nadal obviously expected the celestial bronze. Can you fix these for me? Seth brought out the 2 golden outfits. The old man's eyes dimmed as his hopes were shattered. Oh, of course, he said with a weak smile to hide how disappointed he was. Oh yeah, and can you make me another under armor with this, he said and brought out the bundles of celestial bronze. The fire in the man's eyes was instantly relit. You are such a mean man, Seth. To break this old man's heart just for fun. Of course, I can make you another one. This should be more than enough and it can guarantee that it will be epic rated. After a short talk, Seth left the tailor alone with the thread. He felt a little disturbed watching the old man handle the material like a long-lost lover. As if by chance he met Finn who came to have lunch with him and Puffles. She acted normal and they enjoyed visited the dwarven restaurant Toad had shown him for a meal. This time the chef was mentally prepared and fought valiantly, but Tord was just a light eater compared to the fairy with the bottomless stomach. The party took a long break in Aura after this terrible quest and Seth had a lot of opportunities to meet them during the breaks he took. Tord's tasks for items became more and more demanding and he direly needed these breaks. But it was worth it as his proficiency kept growing despite becoming closer and closer to the rank up. Enchantment had also reached Level 9 and Goldsmith was close to it. Seeing his skills growing, Seth worked in the workshop with rekindled motivation. Just a little more. He worked tirelessly. The recent incidents had given him a feeling that he might not have much more time. Whether this meant the situation in Aura, or the return to Earth, he was not sure. All he could think of was finally finishing the goal of this arduous journey. Step by step, he would then forge his equipment once his skill broke through. Seth realized that his time in Aura was soon coming to an end. Now that he had brought the celestial bronze to Nadal and his skills grew, it would soon be time for him to think about his own gear. Chapter 140. Burden of Peace. Previously on Seth's birthday. Orihumas are really something special, it only took you a few months, what other need years to achieve? You will soon reach the journeyman rank. What are your plans afterward? A bloated Tord asked an even more bloated Seth. What do you mean? He said with a lazy mind. Well, your tutelage ends once you reach journeyman. Did you forget that? I could keep you as a worker if you really want to stay, but there won't be any more benefits afterward. Seth had forgotten it over the last few weeks. Or maybe he had suppressed the thought. Journeyman means one had mastered all the basics of the craft and was fit to go on a journey to find their own place in the world. The apprenticeship would end there. In general, this was the point when a normal blacksmith would travel into the world to broaden their horizons, to gain experience, and find enlightenment in working with many different materials. He realized that he had avoided this thought by concentrating on grinding. I guess, I will return to Earth. Oh, are you sure? I know it's your home and I'm not saying that it's a bad decision, but isn't it currently quite chaotic and dangerous there? You could become a great blacksmith if you stay. Yet, why exactly did he want to return again? It had always been clear to him that he would return, and lately he felt this growing urge to return. But why again? When he closed his eyes, he saw the mountains where he went hiking with his parents when he was younger. A sea of bright flames burning a whole city. The pictures of a small bedroom came to his mind. The picture of a girl his age, maybe younger, mutilated and abused, lying on the bed. A square filled with blood and broken weapons. A sword penetrating the skull of a giant snake while he was on the edge of death himself. A tiny fairy meekly crying for help on the dark surface of a vast ocean. His fingers absent-mindedly stroked the edge of his dish. The growing urge to return burning in his chest. Homesickness, I guess, he said. Seth had no idea about his goals. Did he want adventures? Or help people? What was this fire, this turmoil he felt in his chest despite living a happy and peaceful life now? Finding this answer might be the answer to why he wanted to return. The dwarf only nodded at this short answer. Present. Ding. Skill, Blacksmith, Adept, Leave 9 has become Blacksmith, Adept, Leave 10. Ding. Skill, Blacksmith, Adept, Leave 10 has become Blacksmith, Journeyman, Leave 1. Seth almost broke down at the anvil. For the last few days, he had worked like he was in a frenzy. He was covered in sweat and soot. With his wide-open eyes and a scraggly beard, he had looked like a madman singing the demonic ballads and forging weapons. Seth dragged himself to his room and fell asleep. He had finally reached the first step and all tension fell off him. Dash. Tord stood in his workshop where several finished weapons with terrifying demonic auras were haphazardly lying around on the floor and the workbenches. He knew from Seth that these weapons were technically not evil, but they still had an unsettling vibe. From their differences, the dwarf guessed that Seth knew maybe 4 or 5 different demonic ballads. Some of them were like the first one the young man forged, weapons that drank the enemy's blood to strengthen themselves. This was the big difference between demonic ballads and normal ones. The ones Tord knew worked just like that and used mana to function. The price for the demonic ones was often blood or life force. Either the targets or the users. Looking at these terrifying weapons, the dwarf wished back the days when his student made cursed weapons with funny effects like causing a cold or sudden back pain. He felt a little blue, thinking that Seth was rushing to leave. Tord did not want company at first, but now he had gotten used to this young man living in his workshop and the occasional visiting fairy and beast girl. He didn't appreciate the elf that recently started to come by once in a while, but he tolerated him. He put on thick gloves for smithing, the ones normal people without fire-resistant hands needed, and put those not evil weapons with evil auras away. He wouldn't want to touch them with his bare hands. Seth woke up with a thick headache. He did not drink enough during his forging frenzy and was now terribly dehydrated. This was one drawback of the system, the automatic recoveries did nothing if they lacked the resources to do it. He crawled to the bathroom and started to gulp down copious amounts of water. After lying down on the bathroom floor for a few minutes, he felt his head clear up. His first thoughts went to his skills. He had ranked up in Blacksmith, just 2 more to go. He stood up and returned to the workshop. Tord saw him look around like a confused zombie. I put the weapons in the storage if you are looking for those, Tord said casually, and Seth started taking them out one by one, carving various enchantments. Ding. Skill, Enchantment, Adept, Leave 9 has become Enchantment, Adept, Leave 10. Ding. Skill, Enchantment, Adept, Leave 10 has become Enchantment, Journeyman, Leave 1. F finally. He exclaimed and threw away the engraving tool. Hey! Don't just throw the tools around. Oh, sorry, he said absent-minded. Why had he been in such a hurry? It was like a trance had been lifted from him. Ding! You have gained the ability, compulsive precognition. Compulsive premonition. An ominous feeling that will compel you to certain actions. You won't understand why you are doing it, but they are the actions you would take if you knew exactly what would happen. What could make him rush to rank up his skills? Oh, fuck, he was wide awake. He rushed down into the smithy. Tord, I'm gonna empty you take some stuff from the storage, he called while passing by the dwarf and threw almost 200 gold in cash on a workbench. He started loading random boxes into his inventory before another thought came to his mind. He turned around and rushed out of the smithy. What is going on? Tord had watched him totally confused and could not react until Seth had already left the smithy. Seth ran to the dwarven commercial district. What wasn't taken by the boxes and other items, was filled with bags of rations and water. Fuck, fuck, fuck. In a haste, he left the halls of stone. He found nobody at the inn. The owner told him that the party had gone to the dungeon. He had no time to wait. Seth sprinted away from the inn towards Naddle's workshop. Seth. Great that you already came, I just wanted to. Sorry, Naddle. I'm in a rush. Is the gambeson ready? Can you give it to me? He interrupted the old man and hurried him to give him the new jacket. Ah, yes. Sorry. You tend to talk a lot when you get older. He brought out the shiny bright golden cloth, but Seth had no time to appreciate the view. He grabbed the gambeson of a similar style like the last padded jacket and stuffed it in his inventory. No, I'm sorry. If I'm wrong, I will explain it later. If I'm wrong, then this is a good bye, see you later. Maybe, he said and was about to leave. I don't understand, but I hope you will be okay. Oh, Seth. What about the rest of the thread? Keep it. Make something from it. I will try to contact you if I have the chance. With that, Seth was gone from the shop and back on the streets. He didn't know how long he still had, but he was sure that this skill implied that he had not much time. If he would have hurried that much to rank up his skills, he couldn't have much time left. He had wanted to prepare so much and now his time was running out. Where next? His shop or the auction house? Auction house. He came to a grinding halt before the big building of the auction house. If Seth had to describe the function of the auction house, he would liken it to Yebby, an online auction site. There were terminals where one could search for items that others wanted to sell. Seth used a lot of money to directly buy and get instant delivery of the items. He got a skill scroll for life magic, a refilling bowl, and an artifact tent. He couldn't think of anything else. As he wanted to run out, he saw the information counter. Maybe. Hello. I'm probably going on a rushed journey to the middle of nowhere. Do you have any tips on what I should buy? The clerk looked at him a little perplexed. I don't know, but how about a one-use portable auction interface, he said with a business smile. You just have to insert mana and you can buy whatever you need once to have an idea. Great, give me a few and... Sorry, these are limited to one per customer. Then one, hurry. Thanks. With that, he grabbed the little silver stick and ran off in the direction of the system church.